Recording. Thursday, 3:47 a.m. Amy. Okay, I'm recording this because I don't know if I can call you. Signal keeps dropping. I've got like 2 bars right now and I don't want to use them calling and have it go to voicemail again. Because if I hear your voicemail one more time, I'm going to lose it. Your voicemail voice is that voice you use when you're trying to sound professional. The one that doesn't sound like you at all, and I can't handle that right now. So I'm recording this instead. I'll figure out how to get it to you. Or maybe I'll just show it to you when I get home. I keep telling myself that. When I get home, I'm parked on a county road off exit 187 on I-70. I've been here I checked the clock when I pulled off and it was about 11 last night. So that's almost 5 hours now. It's dark. Not just night dark. I mean genuinely dark. There are no lights on the highway. No headlights. No overhead signs. Nothing. There's a town about 3 miles east called Glasgow. I've driven past the exit 100 times, and I can't see a single light from that direction. I don't know if that means the power's out or if it means something else. I'm going to tell you what happened. From the beginning. Because if something goes wrong out here, and I don't think it will, I'm going to be fine. I need you to know I'm going to be fine. But if it does, I want there to be a record. I want Paige to know what I was doing and why. I want her to know I was thinking about her the whole time. She's 8. You know she's 8, obviously. But I keep saying it like it's an argument. Like the universe should give a damn. Okay? From the beginning. Recording. Thursday, 3:51 a.m. So it was Wednesday. Yesterday. I had a run from the Hartfield Distribution Center in Wichita. Yeah, the one I've done 30 times. The one where the loading dock guys always leave the bay doors open in winter, so by the time I get there to back in my fingers are blue. And I was hauling a mixed freight load to a Cisco depot outside Kansas City. Nothing special. I'd done the same route twice that month already. I left Wichita around 11 p.m., which is normal for that run, because the depot wants overnight deliveries so they can process in the morning. I had my coffee. I had the Bluetooth going with that baseball podcast I like, the one you hate. The interstate was quiet. It's always quiet that time of night. I was maybe 40 miles out when the podcast cut and the emergency broadcast thing came on. You know that sound, that horrible 2-tone thing that makes your stomach drop even when it's just a tornado watch? Except it wasn't a tornado watch. It was I don't even remember the exact words. Something about reports of violent assaults in Wichita and Salina and Topeka. Multiple incidents. Police response ongoing. People told to shelter in place. I turned it up and drove. Here's the thing about me, and here's the thing about 22 years of long haul. You hear a lot of stuff on the radio out here. You hear storms, you hear accidents, you hear Amber Alerts. You hear all kinds of things that sound bad and turn out to be bad in a local, manageable way. 2 years ago, there was a chemical plant fire outside Salina, and they were telling people to stay inside, and I drove right past it at 65 miles an hour, and by the time I was 30 miles east, it was somebody else's news. That's the job. You move through other people's emergencies. So I didn't stop. I kept driving. I turned the podcast back on. But the podcast didn't come back. There was static, and then a different emergency broadcast, and then the static again. And I remember thinking, okay, that's weird. And I remember the moment. I know the exact mile marker. It was 261. I can see it in my head, the green sign with the white numbers. The moment I looked out at the oncoming lanes and realized I hadn't seen a car going the other direction in about 20 minutes. At midnight on a Wednesday on I-70, that's not that unusual, but something about it felt different. I don't know how to explain the feeling without it sounding like I'm making it up after the fact. It just felt too quiet. Not highway quiet, which is its own kind of busy. It felt like the road was holding its breath. I kept driving. The first bad thing I saw was at mile marker 247. There was a car in the median, facing the wrong direction. Headlights on, both front doors open. Nobody in it that I could see. That by itself isn't a disaster. People pull over for all kinds of reasons. But both doors open, facing the wrong direction. That means whoever got out wasn't planning to get back in. I slowed down. Not much. I was still going maybe 45 when I passed it. I looked as long as I could. Empty seats. Headlights pointing at the grass. The interior light was on, and I could see a purse on the passenger seat, and what looked like a fast food bag on the floor. Those details are the ones that stuck, because they're so normal. It looked like somebody's Tuesday, and then I was past it. I called dispatch, got a busy signal, called again. Same thing. I called you. Voicemail. I called your mom's house because Paige was staying there that week, you remember. You had that conference in Dallas, and your mom offered to take her for the week. Busy signal there too. I sat with that for a minute. Both of my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like I was 16 years old again, staring at the road, trying to decide what the busy signal meant. Could mean the lines were overloaded. Could mean something with the tower. Could mean anything. I kept driving. Recording, Thursday, 4:12 a.m. Sorry, I had to stop. I heard something outside and I turned the phone off because the screen light was too bright. It was nothing. An animal, I think. A dog, maybe. The way it moved. Something with 4 legs, anyway. Where was I? The second bad thing was the truck stop at exit 224. That one with the big orange sign you can see for 2 miles. The one that does the fried chicken and has the weird arcade games in the back. We stopped there, on the way to your cousin Diane's wedding, remember? You ate chicken tenders for dinner, and then judged me for getting the hot dog because of something you'd read about hot dogs on the interstate. I reminded you of that. You did not find it as funny as I did. I pulled off because I needed to check the load, and because I wanted to use a phone that wasn't mine. The lot was full. Not weirdly full, not empty. Full the way it gets around shift change. Rigs parked every which way. A couple fuel islands occupied. Orange light coming from the windows. Looked normal from a distance. I parked and got out, and the first thing I noticed was the sound. There should have been sound. Engines idling. The ventilation fans on the building. Somebody's radio. Instead, there was just nothing. And the orange light from the windows turned out to be one of the overhead fluorescents flickering. Not the lights inside being on. The inside was dark. The front door was standing open. I stood in the parking lot for a second. I was still in that mode where you try to find the reasonable explanation, you know? Okay, the power's out. Okay, it's late and the staff went home early. Okay. And then I heard the sound from inside. Low. Not quite groaning and not quite, I don't know what to call it. Like someone with a mouthful of something trying to say a word. Just that one sound, repeated, from somewhere in the dark. I got back in my truck. I didn't run. I walked fast and I got in, and I locked the door, and I sat there with my hands on the wheel and tried to think. And what I thought was, get back on the road, get to Kansas City, get to the depot, drop the load, and figure out what's happening from there. So that's what I did. I got back on I-70, and I drove. Except about 8 miles later I hit the backup. Recording, Thursday, 4:29 a.m. The backup was, okay, picture rush hour traffic, not moving, bumper to bumper. Now picture it at 12:45 in the morning, on an interstate in the middle of Kansas. Cars stopped in both lanes. Not some of them, all of them. Some of them had their hazards on, the little orange blinks going. Some didn't. Some had their headlights on. Some were dark. I could see maybe half a mile of it before the road curved and I lost the view, and I couldn't see where it ended. I stopped. I put my hazards on. I sat there. I tried the radio again and got the emergency broadcast. Full signal this time, and the voice was calm in that specific way, that people in emergency broadcasts are calm when things are not calm. It was saying the words violent incidents and do not approach, and authorities are responding, in a loop, over and over. And underneath the words there was this occasional sound that I kept thinking was static, but wasn't quite static. More like voices in a crowd far away. Like someone was recording the broadcast near a window with something happening outside. I gave it 10 minutes. The cars didn't move. Nobody got out of their cars. Not one person, which is unusual, because when you hit a backup this bad at this hour, you expect to see people standing in the road, walking forward to see what's happening, doing what people do. Nobody got out. I opened my window, stuck my head out, looked back. Headlights going back as far as I could see. Looked forward. Dark. Stopped cars. And past the curve, nothing but black. Then I heard it, coming from the ditch on the right side of the road, and then from between the cars ahead of me. Not the same sound as the truck stop. This was plural. Multiple voices doing that same low sound. That isn't quite a word, coming from different directions. I put my truck in reverse, slow, careful, watching my mirrors. There was a quarter-mile of open road behind me before the cars started. I backed up the whole way, turned the wheel, pulled onto the shoulder, and did the most illegal thing I've done in 22 years of driving. I drove the wrong way on the shoulder of the interstate for about 2 miles, until I reached the last exit before the backup. I took that exit, found this county road, pulled over behind a tree line where you can't see the truck from the highway. That was 11 p.m. It's almost 5 a.m. now. I don't know what's on that highway. Recording. Thursday, 6:03 a.m. Amy. Something happened about an hour ago and I need to tell you about it while it's still clear. A truck pulled up, not right behind me, off to the side, another rig, a Peterbilt, kind of rust orange color, parked with the nose pointed toward the highway. The driver got out and I watched him for a minute from my window before I decided to get out too. He looked okay. He was moving normally, walking in a straight line. He was on his phone, holding it up, trying to get a signal. His name was Dexter Holt, he told me, out of Amarillo. He'd been coming the other direction, west on I-70, and hit a backup on his side too. He'd been parked on this same county road for 3 hours already, before I even got here, and I hadn't noticed his truck because of the tree line. We stood in the gray dawn light and talked. He was maybe 50, heavyset, wearing a Carhartt jacket that had a tear along the collar. He had a coffee thermos that he kept tilting back and finding empty, which he did about 4 times during our conversation, with the same expression of surprise each time. He looked tired, but okay, oriented. He was making jokes about his dispatcher, about how he'd left 3 voicemails and the last one was just him listing all the reasons he needed a raise. I liked him immediately. That's the part that makes this hard to say. He'd seen more than me coming from the west. He'd passed through a town called Russell, and he said it was... He kept starting to describe it, and then stopping. He said he'd seen people on the road, behaving like they were very, very drunk. He'd seen a pickup truck on its side with the doors open. He'd passed a guy just standing in the middle of the westbound lane, not moving, and Dex had honked, and the guy had turned toward the sound, but not walked toward it, just turned. Dex had driven around him. "You think it's some kind of gas leak?" he asked me. "Like, environmental? Because that would explain the..." And he made a hand gesture that meant I don't know how to finish this sentence. I said I didn't know. He said he was going to try to cut south on county roads, get to Salina, find a motel, wait it out. I said that sounded reasonable. I said be careful. He got back in his truck. I got back in mine. 15 minutes later, I heard a sound from his direction. I looked in my side mirror and his Peterbilt was still there, engine running. But the door was open again. I sat with that for a second. Then I climbed back into the cab and reached under the seat for the tire iron I keep there, which I have literally never used as a weapon, only for tires, but I grabbed it anyway. I got out. His door was hanging open. I walked up to the driver's side and looked in. Empty. His thermos was on the seat. His phone was in the cup holder. Nobody leaves their phone. I backed away. I went around the front of his truck slowly, and I looked between the 2 rigs, and I found him. He was crouched near the rear dual on my trailer, and he had his back to me, and his head was, there's an angle to it that wasn't right, tilted back further than necks are supposed to go. His jacket had a tear on the arm that wasn't there before, or that I hadn't noticed, and underneath it, he heard me, or felt me somehow. He turned around. I recognized his face, same beard, same Carhartt, but the eyes were completely wrong. There's no way to describe what was wrong with them except to say that the part of a person that looks at you and knows you're a person, that part was gone. He looked at me the way you look at a lamp you're trying to reach around. He came toward me and he was fast. Faster than I expected for a big guy. I didn't think. I hit the side of his head with the tire iron, and the sound it made was bad, and he went down, and I stood there shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, and then I got back in my truck, pulled forward, turned around, and drove the other way up the county road. He was on the ground when I left. I don't know if he got up. I'm sorry, Amy. I keep thinking about his empty thermos. I don't know why that's the detail I keep coming back to. Recording. Thursday, 9:17 a.m. I found another road, Route 24, heading east parallel to the interstate. It's 2-lane blacktop, farm fields on both sides, and for a while it was empty. Just me and the road, and the gray sky turning white. I had about a quarter tank of diesel, and I was calculating. I always calculate. You know how I am. I can't stop myself. And a quarter tank gets me about 100 miles, maybe a little more if I'm easy on the pedal, which I was being. I needed fuel. I needed food. I had about half a box of crackers in the cab, a bag of almonds, 3 bottles of water, and 2 energy drinks. I had a fleece blanket behind the seat. I had my tire iron. I thought about all of this very calmly, which in retrospect was probably some kind of shock response. That neat clinical feeling where you make lists, because making lists is the only thing that keeps you from doing what you actually want to do, which is pull over and put your head on the wheel. I also thought about Paige, a lot. She's been staying at your mom's, and I know your mom's house. I know that basement, that big door, the neighborhood. Quiet street. Your mom has that yappy dog. I held on to those details like they were ballast. I passed a farmhouse and didn't stop. Then another. I passed a grain elevator, and the lot was empty, and the lights were off. I crossed over I-70 on an overpass and looked down, and the traffic below had gotten worse. More cars. Some had clearly been in accidents, rear-enders. One SUV had drifted into the median and rolled, sitting on its side with the wheels still spinning slow. And between the cars, moving through the gaps between bumpers, I could see figures, walking, not rushing, just walking, weaving between stopped cars the way you'd walk through a crowded parking lot. I didn't stop. I found an ag supply place, you know, one of those farm supply stores, sells seed and fertilizer and tools, in a tiny town called Portis. Hadn't been more than 800 people in that town before, probably half that when I drove through it. The supply store had its lights on. A pickup truck parked out front with the tailgate down. An older man was loading bags of something into it. I pulled in. He saw my rig and froze. Then he relaxed a little and waved me over, cautious. His name was Thomas. Thomas Briggs, he said, 71 years old, retired county road supervisor. Still lived on a farm about 6 miles from town. He'd been coming to get water filtration supplies and some bags of dried corn for his chickens, he said, and the way he said it was so completely normal it almost made me cry. The chickens. The specific practical errand. The tailgate down, ready to be loaded. He wanted to know what I'd seen to the west. I told him. He wanted to know what I thought. I told him I didn't know yet. Been hearing things on AM, he said. His voice was the kind of flat that comes from spending decades in flat country. Since about midnight. Sounds like it's everywhere. Not just here. I asked him what he meant by everywhere. He lifted one of the seed bags into the truck and set it down and looked at me. Denver, St. Louis, Chicago. They're saying Chicago's bad. The language they're using. They started out saying violent incidents, and now they're saying stay indoors and avoid contact with other people. Don't try to help anyone you don't personally know. Call nobody. Wait. He picked up another bag. Language changed real fast. We loaded the last of his supplies together. I asked him if there was a gas station in town. He pointed down the main street. He said it might be open. The Hendersons ran it, and the Hendersons were reliable people. I asked if I could follow him to his farm. He thought about it. Long pause. Not unfriendly. I got a wife, he said, and my son's family staying with me. 7 people total. I can't take on a stranger. Not yet. I'm sorry. I said I understood. I didn't tell him about Dex. I didn't tell him about the tire iron. He gave me 2-gallon jugs of water from the back of his truck and told me the Henderson's gas station was on the left and to be careful out there. I thanked him. I watched him drive off down the county road toward his farm. I hope he made it. I still think about him. Recording, Thursday, 11:45 a.m. The gas station was open. Linda Henderson was 53, short, with a graying braid over one shoulder and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She was behind the counter when I came in, and she had a shotgun on the counter beside the register, just sitting there, and she looked at me the way you look at the weather, assessing, not afraid. She said diesel was still working. She said she'd been selling fuel since 7 a.m. and had seen maybe 12 vehicles, mostly locals, stocking up. She said her husband Dale had gone up to their house on the property behind the station and hadn't come back, and she wasn't going to go check because the news on the radio was telling her not to approach anyone showing symptoms, and Dale had been complaining about a sore throat for 2 days. She said this without any change in her voice. Eyes clear, hands steady, but she kept touching the glasses on the chain, running her thumb over the hinge joint, back and forth. I said I was sorry. She said, "Don't be. He was probably fine. She was probably overreacting. He probably just fell asleep up there." I filled the tank, 40 gallons in the saddle tanks on both sides. I went inside and she let me take food without arguing about it. Canned goods from the shelves, chips, crackers, a plastic jar of peanut butter. I paid for all of it. I still had cash. I didn't know if cash meant anything anymore, but I paid because it felt right, and she took it because it felt right to her too. We were both pretending things worked the way they usually worked. I asked her where she was going to go. "I'm going to wait right here," she said. "For Dale, or for someone to tell me this is over." I tried to talk her into coming with me. She wouldn't. She had the shotgun. She had stock in the store. She had a reason to stay. I left her 2 of my water bottles because she hadn't thought about water. I wrote my cell number on a piece of receipt paper and told her to try it if she needed to. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket. I never heard from her. Recording, Friday, 2:15 a.m. I've been driving on and off for most of the day, and then sleeping in the bunk since about 8. I set an alarm for 2 and I got up and I'm recording this from the bunk, lying on my back, the phone on my chest. I'm parked at a rest area, not the ones on the interstate. Those are probably bad by now. This is a state park pull-off, just a gravel turnout with a picnic table and an outhouse, off a county road. No other vehicles. Quiet. I can hear what I think is wind in the trees, and that's all. Today was long. I'm going to try to describe it, but I'm so tired, and I don't want to skip anything. After the gas station, I took Route 24 east to a small road that I found on the atlas. I have a paper atlas, the big Rand McNally. You make fun of me for it every single time. You say, "Why don't you just use your phone's GPS?" And the reason is because my phone's GPS doesn't work when the signal is gone, and my paper atlas doesn't need a signal. So, vindicated, unfortunately. The small roads were mostly clear. 2-lane county stuff through farmland. I passed through 4 small towns during the afternoon, and they were different from each other in ways I kept trying to parse. First one, Cocker City, tiny, maybe 300 people, empty looking but not destroyed. Curtains in windows, cars parked normally, a dog trotting down the main street that stopped and looked at me and then continued on like it had somewhere to be. Second town, Downs, bigger, maybe 1,200 people, and there was smoke coming from a building on the east end. Not a big fire, not out of control, more like something had been burning for a while and was mostly done. A couple of cars with their doors open on the main street. I didn't stop. Third town, Cocker. Wait, no. Third was Beloit. I'm getting confused. Beloit. County seat, bigger, maybe 4,000. I bypassed it on the north side, and I could see the downtown from a distance, and there were moving things there that I didn't look at too long. I kept my speed up. Fourth town is where I had my first really close call. It was called Cortland. 200 people, maybe fewer. I drove through at about 20 miles an hour because the road went straight through the center and there was no bypass. 6 blocks, that's all. 6 blocks of someone's life's work, and someone's home, and someone's church, and it was okay. I was through 4 of the 6 blocks when something hit the driver's side door. Not hard, not like a rock, like a hand, flat open palm. And I looked, and there was a figure there, right against the door, walking fast to keep up with the truck, and it was a woman in a nightgown. That was the first detail. The nightgown, pale yellow, floral, wrong clothes for a cold morning. Her face was, she was looking up at my window, but not at me. At the window itself, at the movement, at the truck. Her mouth was open. I accelerated. She fell back. In my mirror, I could see she'd stopped at the edge of the road and was just standing there, watching my taillights. I drove another 2 hours before I stopped shaking. I think she was infected. I have to believe she was infected. I have to believe there was nothing I could do. Recording. Friday, 6:55 a.m. Okay. I slept for about 2 hours after that last recording and woke up to what I thought was something hitting the roof of the cab. Turned out to be a branch. But I was awake after that, completely awake. The kind of awake where your heart is going so fast you can feel it in your ears. And I lay in the bunk for an hour thinking. Here's what I decided. I can't go straight east. Not on the interstate and not on the main county roads running parallel. Everything going toward Kansas City, which is the big metro pull, is going to be choked. People running from the cities would be going west, not east, and I'd be running into them. And Kansas City itself, I don't know how bad Kansas City is. The emergency broadcasts have been getting less informative, not more. Yesterday, they were describing incidents and saying to shelter in place. Last night, the broadcast was just a recorded message, the same loop, nobody live, and this morning, when I turned on the radio, it was mostly static, with a few AM stations cutting through. One of them, I picked it up for about 20 minutes before it faded, was somebody talking, not a broadcaster, just a person talking into a mic, a man, older voice. He was describing things he could see from what sounded like a high building somewhere in a city. He was calm. The things he was describing were not calm. He mentioned the specific detail of how they moved. They don't run, they just walk toward whatever makes noise. And that matched what I'd seen. He said they didn't react to light. He said they reacted to sound, to movement. He said the ones he could see from the window had been standing in the same place for 3 hours, and he thought maybe if you were quiet enough, still enough, they'd eventually just walk away. That was the most useful information I'd gotten since this started. Reacts to sound and movement. Doesn't react to light. Doesn't think. Just orients and walks. I've been driving long enough to know a lot of secondary roads. That's one thing this job gives you. Not wisdom, not necessarily health benefits, but a very detailed map in your head of how roads connect in the midsection of this country. I knew the town of Concordia had a truck stop, one of the full-service ones with a mechanic's bay and a scale, and I knew it was 11 miles north, accessible without touching the interstate. I decided to make that my first real objective. Fuel was good. Linda Henderson's gas had topped me off. Food and water were okay for maybe 3 days if I was conservative. What I needed was information, and maybe some company that wasn't going to try to bite me. I pulled out at first light. Recording, Friday, 3:40 p.m. A lot happened today. I'm going to go through it. Concordia. The truck stop is called Starlight Truck Plaza, and it's a nice one, or was, before. Good food counter, decent showers, that kind of thing. I pulled in at about 9 in the morning, and there were 6 other rigs parked there. 6. Just 6, in a lot that could hold 50. That told me most people had either already moved on, or were still stuck somewhere. I sat in the lot for a few minutes before I got out, watched. One of the rigs had its engine running, but nobody visible in the cab. Another had its curtains drawn across the windshield. 2 more were clearly empty, doors open, engines off. The 5th one had a hand-lettered sign in the windshield, made from the back of a cardboard box. It said, "Armed, stay back." The 6th one, a white Volvo with a flatbed carrying what looked like construction equipment, had its driver sitting on the running board. Older man, heavy-set, wearing a red flannel and work boots. He was eating something from a can with a plastic spork. I pulled alongside the sixth rig and rolled down my window. His name was Roy Danner, 62. Been driving flatbed for 34 years. He looked at me with the wariness of someone who's been awake for a long time, then decided I was probably okay. "You coming from the west?" he said. I said yes. "Worse over there?" I said yes. He offered me his spork to take a turn at the can, which had creamed corn in it. I said I was okay. I had food. He nodded and went back to eating, and we talked while he finished the can. He'd been at this truck stop since the night before, coming east out of Salina, and he'd been trying to contact dispatch and getting nothing. He'd heard from another driver, woman named Kelly, he said, in the armed sign rig, that the CB was still working on some channels. He'd been trying to coordinate with her to decide what to do. I went to the trunk of the cab and got my CB radio. I have the Cobra 29 mounted under the dash, always have it, and checked what channel Kelly was on. Channel 14. She was there. Her name turned out to be Kelly Marsh, and she was 37, and she was not from trucking. She was an LPN, nurse, or close to it, who'd borrowed her brother's rig to move some of his equipment north because her brother had been sick when this started and couldn't drive himself. She'd been stuck in this parking lot for 14 hours, and she had a sidearm, and she was not apologetic about the sign. "There were two guys who came to my window last night," she said over the CB. "Tried my door first, then knocked. I held up the gun, and they moved on." I asked if they were infected. "No," she said. "That's the part that worries me. They were not infected." That was my first reminder that the infected weren't going to be the only problem. There was a fourth person in the building itself. I didn't see her until I went inside for the bathrooms. She was in the back of the restaurant area, near the coffee station, a girl. I say girl. She was probably 19, 20, sitting in a booth with her backpack on her lap and her knees pulled up to her chest and her shoes on the seat. She watched me walk in and then watched me use the bathroom and come back out. When I came back through, she said, "Is your truck the blue Kenworth?" I said yes. She said, "How far have you come today?" I said about 30 miles of road, mostly north-south. She said, "Can I ride with you?" Her name was Nora. Wait, no. Nora comes later. I keep getting the timeline wrong. The girl's name was, give me a second, Becca. Her name was Becca Tillis, 19, a student at a community college in Manhattan, Kansas, not New York, the other one, who'd been hitchhiking home to Phillipsburg when the ride she had left her at this truck stop because the driver turned back. She'd been in the restaurant for 18 hours. She'd eaten 4 bags of trail mix from the vending machine and had $3 left. I sat down across from her and talked to her for a while. She was scared, but not panicking. She'd talked to her mom by phone yesterday afternoon, she said, and her mom had sounded okay, but she hadn't been able to get through since. Her mom lived in Phillipsburg, which was maybe 60 miles north. She'd been trying to figure out a way to get there. The thing I noticed about Becca, and I notice it because it mattered, not because I'm trying to describe her, was that she was very practical for someone 19. She wasn't asking me what I thought was happening, or when it would be over, or who was fixing it. She was asking how many miles to Phillipsburg, and whether I knew the roads, and what the fuel situation was. She'd already figured out that her mom's house was probably the right place to be, and she was working the problem. I respected that. I said I didn't know the roads north from here that well, but I could try to find a route on the atlas. She said yes, please. I went back to the truck and got the atlas. Roy came with me when I went back inside. Kelly stayed in her cab. She didn't want to leave her rig, but stayed on the CB. We spread the atlas on a booth table, and the three of us, me, Becca, and Roy, looked at the roads between here and Phillipsburg. And that was how the first real group decision got made. Not formally. Nobody elected anybody. We just looked at the map together and started talking about what made sense. Recording. Friday, 10:48 p.m. Okay, I need to finish today. We decided on a few things at that truck stop table. 1. Roy would come with me. 2. Becca would ride in the sleeper cab. 3. Kelly would convoy behind us in her brother's rig. 4. We'd go north on US 81 toward Phillipsburg, drop Becca, and then figure out what came next. There's more to say about the decision, and some of it is complicated, but the simple version is that going north felt safer than going east, and staying here felt like a losing position. The truck stop had food and water, but not much. The generator was running, but on propane, that probably had a day or two left. And after Kelly's report about the men at her window the night before, sitting in a parking lot next to a lit-up building with a running generator, seemed like a way to attract the wrong attention. We left at 2 p.m. I went first, Kelly behind, Roy's flatbed third. Route 81 north was clear for the first 8 miles. Then we hit a stretch where something had happened. I still don't know what exactly. About 15 cars, most of them headed south, piled up across both lanes. Not a chain reaction accident. There was no crumple pattern, no indication of speed impact. More like they'd just stopped, and the ones behind had bumped them, slow, and then those had stopped too. I went around on the shoulder. Kelly got her wide-load rig through by squeezing the right lane and taking the shoulder ditch for about 100 yards. Roy had to move 2 of the cars with the flatbed, just pushed them off the shoulder with the corner of his bumper. Took 15 minutes. During those 15 minutes, I stood outside my truck and listened. The fields on both sides of the road were November stubble, brown, 6 inches of dried cornstalk. And something was moving through the field on the east side. Not close. 100 yards, maybe more. Just movement in the stubble. Slow and irregular, coming generally toward the sound of our engines. I got everyone back in their cabs and we moved. We got Becca to Phillipsburg at about 4:30. Her mom's house was a ranch style on a residential street, white siding, a truck parked in the drive that I didn't recognize. Becca knocked on the door for 2 full minutes before it opened, and the woman who opened it grabbed Becca like she was something lost at sea for 6 years. I sat in my truck and watched them through the windshield, and tried very hard not to think about Paige. Becca's mom offered to take Roy and Kelly in, had room for them both. Roy decided to stay. Kelly decided not to. She came back to the cab window and said she wanted to keep moving, said she had family in Nebraska somewhere, and maybe she could find a clear road north. I asked if she wanted to convoy together for a while longer. She thought about it, said she wanted to check her map first. She went back to her rig. 20 minutes later, she came back on the CB and said she'd found a route that went more northwest than where I was heading, and it didn't make sense to stick together. She said good luck. I said good luck back. She clicked off, and that was the last I heard of her. I hope she made it to Nebraska. I hope Nebraska was better. I spent that night in Phillipsburg, parked in front of Becca's mom's house. I slept better than I had in 2 days, which is not the same as sleeping well. The bunk was fine. I've slept in it hundreds of times, but the sounds were different from normal. No highway traffic, just occasional dogs in the distance, and once, at about 3 a.m., what sounded like someone shouting far away. 3 or 4 words that I couldn't make out. Then nothing. Recording. Saturday, 7:30 a.m., day 3. I'm keeping count now. Wednesday night, when I heard the broadcast, that was day 0. Thursday was day 1. Friday was day 2. Today is day 3. I've been sitting outside Becca's mom's house for 30 minutes, thinking about what comes next. I have good fuel. Kelly gave me one of her spare 5-gallon cans before she left. Bless her for that. I have food for probably 4 more days if I keep rationing. Water is okay. The pump in front of the truck stop was gravity-fed, old farm style, and Roy had the sense to fill several jugs before we left. What I don't have is a plan. Or I have half a plan, which is almost worse, because it means I can see where I'm going, but not how I'm going to get there. The thing that I haven't said yet is this. I'm not just trying to survive out here. I'm trying to get home. Home is Omaha, about 260 miles northeast of where I'm sitting right now. 260 miles has never sounded far before. Right now it sounds like the moon. I don't know if the roads are clear. I don't know if Omaha is better or worse. I got one piece of news last night. Becca's mom had a battery-powered radio and had been listening all day. And one of the things she'd heard was that some parts of Nebraska were severely impacted, which is the kind of phrase that people use when they mean something much worse than those words sound. She didn't know what that meant for Omaha specifically. I called your number again this morning. It rang. No voicemail, just ringing. That's different. That's progress. Or something happened to the voicemail system. I can't tell which, and either could be true. I'm going to drive. Recording. Saturday, 4:20 p.m. Day 3. Afternoon. I need to tell you about the weird thing. I know I've been calling things weird. The woman in the nightgown, the truck stop, all of it. But what I saw this morning has a different quality, and I can't stop thinking about it. I came north on US 83. Clear roads, mostly farmland. A few towns that I skirted around the edges of. At about 10:30, I crossed a county road intersection, and I had to slow down to make sure nothing was coming. Force of habit. Plus the habit's more important now than it's ever been. And I looked left and right, and what I saw on the east-west road stopped me. To the east, as far as I could see in that direction, maybe 2 miles until the road bent. Cars. Every single car on that road pointed west. Bumper to bumper. Hundreds of them. A perfect column of vehicles, all headed in the same direction. All stopped, and they must have stopped at roughly the same time, because the spacing between them was almost uniform, like they'd all just braked simultaneously and never started again. Not accidents, just stopped. To the west, maybe half a mile, I could see a red barn and a farmhouse, and a grain elevator, and a perfect ordinary Tuesday afternoon, except it was Saturday, and nothing was moving. I stayed at that intersection for 10 minutes. I didn't want to drive east, into the column. I didn't know what had stopped all those people. I didn't know if the thing that stopped them was still there, or if it had moved somewhere else. I went north. I didn't go east. But here's the part I can't stop thinking about. When I was sitting at that intersection, window down, engine off so I could hear, I heard something from the direction of those cars. Very faint, very steady. Not the sound those infected make, not the groaning, something else. Almost like, and I know this doesn't make sense, but this is what it sounded like music. Coming from deep in the column of stopped cars. A radio, maybe, that was still on in one of the vehicles. Or multiple radios, the signal drifting. But it had a rhythm that didn't sound like radio. It sounded like someone was doing it on purpose. I closed the window and drove. Recording, Sunday, 1:00 a.m. Day 4. I don't have a lot to say about the rest of Saturday. I drove. Avoided 2 towns that I could see from a distance had problems. Found a pull-off in the middle of nowhere and spent the night. What I want to talk about instead is the bunk. Because I realize I haven't described this space at all, and it's where I'm spending most of my time, and after 4 days it's starting to feel different from before. The sleeper cab on a Kenworth T680 is not huge. They're not all the same size, and I have the mid-roof version, which gives me a little more height than the standard, but it's still basically the size of a large closet laid on its side. The bunk is 60 inches wide by 80 inches long, which sounds like it should feel roomy, but there's all the stuff that lives in the sleeper that you don't think about. The hanging storage pockets on the wall, the overhead cabinetry, the television mount, no TV in there currently, the inverter, and the power strip, the small refrigerator that I haven't run since I stopped at Concordia because it draws too much power. All of that makes the actual inhabitable space feel tighter. I've got a wool blanket, proper one, the old Pendleton you gave me 3 Christmases ago, the one with the geometric pattern that Paige calls the TV blanket, because it looks like a Native American TV static. I have a pillow that I've been using since about 2019, and should have replaced 2 years ago. I have my sleep mask, which I bought for overnights on the road, and which I've been using even though I'm parked, because the darkness helps. The smell in here, on day 4, is something I need to address. I've been using water from the jugs to wash my hands and face, but not anything else. I've changed my shirt once. I have one more set of clean clothes after this one, and then I'm going to be wearing things past their useful date. The cab already smells like someone's been living in it. Coffee, body heat, the particular stale undertone of recycled air. There's a crack in the door seal on the passenger side that I've never fixed. It lets in cold air and also a thin thread of outside smell, which right now is November farm air, dry and cold, and I don't actually mind that one. I've set up a system. My food is in the right side storage compartment, sorted. Cans on the bottom, dry goods on top, water jugs on the floor in front of the passenger seat. I've been keeping a mental inventory. I have 16 cans, beans, corn, a few soups, tuna fish. I have crackers, the peanut butter, a bag of rice I got at Becca's mom's house, half a bag of almonds, 4 protein bars, 3 granola bars, some hard candy. I have about 12 liters of water. I'm averaging about 1,200 calories a day. That's not a lot. That's about half of what I normally eat. I'm not going to pretend I'm not hungry all the time, because I am. But hunger is manageable. Hunger is just a number getting lower. The bathroom situation is the thing nobody talks about. You figure it out. The outhouse at rest stops when there's one nearby. Otherwise, the edge of a field with some fast food napkins that I keep a stack of in the glove box. This is not the worst part of surviving in a truck cab. It's just a thing that has to be handled and then not thought about. I'm alive. I'm warm. I'm pointed generally north and east. I think about you and Paige constantly. Paige would think this was exciting for about 6 hours, and then she'd want the TV and the specific blanket and the specific snack, and I would lose my mind telling her I don't have those things. And the thought of that, the specific irritating normal childhood of my specific irritating normal daughter, keeps me going. More than anything else, more than any bigger thought about civilization or survival or whatever. I just want to tell her to stop leaving her shoes in the middle of the living room. Recording. Sunday, 5:45 p.m. Day 4. Evening. I found the military convoy today, or what used to be it. I was on Highway 36, heading east, planning to jog north toward Nebraska state line when I could find a reasonable county road. About 20 miles east of Mankato, I came around a long curve and they were just there. 4 military vehicles, one of them a Humvee, 2 of them the big troop transport kind with the canvas cover on the back, one a cargo truck. Parked in the right lane, single file, perfectly even spacing, engines off. No soldiers. I stopped my rig about 200 yards back, turned off my engine, sat and watched. The vehicles looked undamaged. No bullet holes that I could see from where I was sitting. No crash damage. The Humvee in front had its windshield intact. The troop transports, their tailgates were down, both of them, the canvas rolled up, and from where I was sitting I could see the benches inside were empty. The canvas was flapping in the wind. There was a cornfield on the south side of the road. The stalks were all knocked over in the same direction, starting at the road's edge, like a wide swath had walked through them. Straight line going south, getting smaller as it went, until you couldn't track it anymore against the rest of the field. Something had walked out of those trucks and into that field. A lot of somethings, given the width of the path. On the north side, on the shoulder of the road, there were things left behind. I could see them from a distance, didn't get close enough to identify them specifically, but the shapes were gear, equipment, a rifle or two lying in the gravel, a helmet. The kind of things you drop when you're running, or the kind of things that fall off when something else is happening. I stayed in my cab and watched for 20 minutes. Nothing moved except the canvas on the transports. I could not see into the corn, and I was very aware that whatever had made that path in the corn could have come back out somewhere I wasn't watching. I turned my engine back on very slowly. I backed up slowly to the intersection I'd come through and went south, then east on a county road, putting distance between me and those transports. I don't know what happened to those soldiers. I've been thinking about it all day and I don't have a conclusion that makes me feel better, so I'm going to stop trying to reach one. Recording. Monday, 8:15 a.m., Day 5. I crossed into Nebraska last night at about 8 p.m. on a gravel road, so far from anything that I barely registered the state line. Just a sign, green and white, Nebraska welcomes you, and a cattle guard, and then the same flat fields on the other side. Good morning, Nebraska. I've made roughly I calculate this off the odometer, which I've been tracking, about 300 miles since night zero. That sounds like a lot, but of it has been north-south movement, and only maybe 60 miles has been progress toward Omaha. I need about 200 more miles of northeast progress to get there. At this rate, that's 4 more days, minimum, longer if the roads get worse. The roads have been getting worse. Not in terms of damage, in terms of blockages. I've been avoiding the main highways, I-70, US 283, all the numbered routes that would normally take me where I want to go. And that means I'm on secondary roads. And the secondary roads are increasingly not secondary anymore. People figured out a week ago, apparently, that the secondary roads were safer, and so they fled onto them, and now some of them are blocked too. Yesterday afternoon I came through a town called Thayer and found it barricaded. Actual barricades, school buses and farm equipment arranged across the road, 3 or 4 people standing on top of the buses with rifles. Not threatening exactly. When they saw my truck, they raised their hands to stop me. Then one of them came down and walked out to my window. His name was Gary. He looked about 40, and he was polite but firm. They weren't letting anyone in. They had about 200 people in the town, and they were trying to keep what they had. He said the nearest clear route east was about 8 miles south, unmarked gravel, would take me to another county road that could get me around. He also told me something. He'd been in contact with a few other towns using a ham radio setup. There was someone in the group who knew how to run it. He said there was a depot east of Hastings, a freight distribution center that was supposed to be. He hesitated, and in the hesitation I heard the uncertainty, operating as a collection point. He wasn't sure what that meant, whether it was organized, whether it was safe, whether it was still going. He'd heard it third hand. A freight depot east of Hastings. I know that area. I've been to depots in that region before. There are 2 of them off exit 312 on I-80, the big interstate that runs east-west across Nebraska. One is a refrigerated storage place I've used before. The other is a general freight consolidation center, a big one, the kind with loading bays and security fencing. If someone had converted that into a safe point, it would make sense. It's defensible, lots of space, built to receive and store large quantities of supplies. If. I wrote down what Gary told me. I'm adding it to the route plan. Recording. Monday, 3:30 p.m. Day 5. Afternoon. Today was the best day so far, which I'm saying carefully, because in context, that means nobody tried to bite me, and I found fuel. The fuel was at a grain elevator on a county road about 14 miles inside Nebraska. The elevator uses diesel to run its equipment, and there's a big red pump on the side that the farmers use to fill their equipment. I pulled up to it at about 11 a.m., and it was unlocked and still had power. I filled both tanks to the top, standing in the November cold holding the pump nozzle, listening to the diesel gurgle into the tank. Felt incredible. I keep thinking about how I used to resent fuel stops because they added time to a run. Right now, filling a tank feels like a meal, feels after you've been hungry. I also found, inside the small office attached to the elevator, a case of bottled water, 2 boxes of granola bars, a case of ramen noodles, and a first aid kit. Someone had been here before me, because there was evidence of a camp, sleeping bag impression on the floor, empty energy drink cans, a stack of fast food napkins. But they were gone. I took what I needed and left the rest, because taking more than you need when you don't know who needs it next feels like bad practice. I also found, tucked behind the door on a nail, a CB radio, older model, fixed to a metal plate like someone had ripped it out of a vehicle, with a cable coiled around it and an antenna that looked intact. There was a handwritten note on masking tape stuck to it that said, CH19 PPL talking. Bless whoever left that. I got it back to the truck and figured out how to hook it into my power system. It's 12 volt. My truck has 12 volt. It was just a matter of getting the right connectors, and I had those in my toolbox. Took about 45 minutes of work. Got it running. Channel 19. There were people talking. Not many. Not a full CB conversation. More like 2 or 3 voices, intermittent, fading in and out with the signal. I drove and listened. One voice I could hear clearly was a man who seemed to be coordinating something. He kept using landmarks I didn't recognize. Places called the Junction, and the Becker property, and South Field. Local stuff. Someone who knew one specific area well. But buried in there, a few times, was a voice that mentioned the depot. I could only hear pieces of it, but what I caught was, still holding, from what I can tell, and then later, don't know how long before and then static. Holding, that word. I turned that over all afternoon. Recording. Tuesday, 5 a.m. Day 6. Very early. I need to tell you something that happened last night that took me a long time to decide to record. I was parked outside a farmhouse about 20 miles south of Hastings. The house looked empty. Dark windows, no vehicles, gate standing open. I'd pulled into the drive because the gravel lane was shielded from the road by a long windbreak of cedar trees, the kind that farmers plant along property lines for exactly this purpose, and I thought I could park without being seen from the road. At about midnight, I woke up because something was wrong with the sounds outside. This is the thing that sleep in the truck teaches you. You learn the difference between the natural sounds of an outside night and something that doesn't belong. Wind sounds a certain way against a metal cab. Animals move in a way you can learn. This was neither. I lay very still in the bunk, listening. Footsteps, on gravel, not running, not sneaking, just walking, the way you walk when you're not thinking about how you're walking. Coming from the direction of the farmhouse, toward the truck, I reached under the bunk where I'd put the tire iron, wrapped my hand around it. My heart was going so fast I could feel it in my jaw. The footsteps stopped, right outside, maybe 5 feet from the cab door. Silence. I counted. I got to 43 seconds before something touched the door. Not a knock, not a hand. More like pressure, the way you might lean against something. Then it moved, along the side of the truck, toward the rear. The footsteps resumed, slow, going toward the back of the trailer. I waited. 15 minutes. Nothing else. In the morning, this morning, I got out and looked. There was nothing on the truck. Nothing at the farmhouse that explained what I'd heard. On the gravel drive, in the frost, there were footprints going from the farmhouse to the side of my truck, and then around the back of the trailer. They went into the stubble field on the other side, and that was where they stopped being readable. Human-shaped footprints, regular size. One set. Going out and not coming back. I left. Recording. Tuesday, 1:00 p.m. Day 6. I'm south of Hastings. I can see the city on the horizon. Water tower, some rooftops. From this distance it looks like a city. Unchanged, ordinary. I know better than to go straight in. I've been on the CB all morning, and the voices on 19 are a little clearer now that I'm closer. I've been able to put together more of what they're saying. There are at least 3 distinct groups talking. One is coordinating around something they call the Becker Road compound. Sounds like a farm that's been fortified. One is a family trying to find where to go, talking in circles, asking questions nobody can answer. The third is the voice that mentions the depot. He calls himself Garrett. He sounds careful, not military precise, but careful. He gives information in pieces, like he's thinking about who might be listening. He's mentioned the freight depot directly twice, called it the hub, said something about 40+ people there now, and something about supply runs. He's not saying it's safe, he's saying it exists. I clicked on my mic and said, "This is Brett on I-80 corridor south of Hastings, looking for the hub, over." Static. Then, "Copy that, Brett. Come back on 17. I went to 17. He was there. His name was Garrett Finch, 39 years old, from Lincoln, former manager of a freight logistics company, which is how he'd ended up at the depot when this started. He'd gone there to check on his trucks. He had people there, he said. More coming. He was trying to build something sustainable. He wanted to know what I was driving, what I had for fuel, whether I was alone. I told him. Kenworth T680, fuel good, traveling alone. He said, "We've got a group here that needs to get to the hub, and we don't have a driver with experience to get them through. We've got a blocked stretch on I-80, and nobody in the group has the vehicle or the experience to clear it safely. I said, "Where's the blockage?" He told me, "About 18 miles east of Hastings, around mile marker 318, there was a multiple vehicle pileup across both lanes and the median. Part of it was on fire, or had been, and the area around it had a lot of infected movement because of whatever noise the fire had made." I asked how many people in the group. 14, he said, including 3 kids. I sat with that. Then I asked him the question that actually mattered. "Tell me about the depot. Is it secured?" A pause. "When I left that was 2 days ago." 2 days ago. I told him I'd call him back. Recording, Tuesday, 2:45 p.m. I called Garrett back and said I'd do it. "This is the part where you'd tell me to be careful. You'd say it in that specific way. Not the anxious way, but the level way. The way you talk when you're trying not to show the anxious underneath. And you'd be right to say it. What I'm agreeing to do is find this group of 14 people, drive through or around a blocked interstate section in a 40-ton commercial truck, and lead them to a destination I've never seen that's been unmanned for 2 days. The thing is, and I thought about this for a long time, sitting still feels more dangerous right now than moving. Every time I've stayed still for too long, something has found me. The footprints last night. The men at Kelly's cab window. The things in the cornfield. Motion is the only protection I've really had. And 14 people. 3 kids. I have a daughter who's 8. I know the math of that. Garrett gave me coordinates, which I translated to map references. His group was sheltering in a farm supply store on the south side of Hastings, the kind with the big metal building and the loading dock. They'd been there for 4 days. They were running low on food, and the area around them was getting more active, as infected from the town proper drifted south. I took Route 6 in from the west, came in from the opposite direction of most of the city, and stayed on the south side. I found the farm supply store at about 2:30 p.m. The Kenworth is not subtle. It's blue and chrome, and about 75 feet long. But I pulled into the lot as quietly as a 75-foot truck can be pulled, and after about 2 minutes the loading dock door rolled up and a man came out. This was Garrett. He looked exactly like how he sounded. Medium everything. Medium height, medium build, brown hair going gray at the sides, maybe 39 like he'd said. He was wearing a canvas jacket and work pants and boots, and he held a radio in one hand and put his other hand up in a wave that was also a hold on a second. We shook hands. He looked at my truck. "Will it hold 14 people?" I said if some of them rode in the trailer on the freight I still had in there. Yes. Not safely in any normal sense, but in this sense, yes. He said, "Okay, come inside and meet everyone." Recording, Tuesday, 11 p.m. Long day. I'm going to try to tell the whole thing. The 14 people inside the farm supply store were as different from each other as you'd expect from a group of 14 strangers thrown together by accident. There was a retired teacher named Helen, who'd turned out to be very good at organizing food rations. There was a young guy named Kyle, maybe 23, red hair, a quality of nervous energy that I found either reassuring or irritating, depending on the moment, who had some military background, he said, and had been helpful with security. There was a woman named Lori, who was a veterinarian, and who had already proved useful in ways you'd expect. There were 2 families, one a couple in their 40s, Pete and Donna, with their teenage son Jake, the other a single mother named Angie, with 2 daughters, 7 and 9. The 9-year-old was named Nora. She was the one I mentioned getting the name wrong earlier. She was not the person at the truck stop. That was Becca. Nora was here. She had dark red hair in 2 braids that weren't very neat anymore, and a raincoat that was too big for her, and she was sitting on a pallet of seed bags reading a book. A real book. The paper kind, not a phone, and the book was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which I know because I could see the cover. She looked up at me when I came in. I said hi. She said hi back, then looked back at her book. Paige would look exactly like that in the same situation, and it killed me. The meeting was short, because there wasn't that much to discuss. Garrett had already laid out the plan to the group. Follow the truck driver, get to the hub, What he hadn't been clear about was what I was clear about. We were going to try to go east on I-80, the most direct route, and there was a blockage at mile 318 that we'd have to get through. The truck could probably clear enough of the pileup to make a path if the damage was what Garrett described. No guarantees. Pete spoke up. Pete was the father in the couple with the teenage son. He was wide, thick-armed, the kind of build you see on men who've done physical work their whole lives, and he had a quality of confidence that came with it, the kind that doesn't usually trouble itself to check whether the confidence is earned. He said he didn't see why we needed to go that way. He said he'd looked at the maps and there were alternate routes south of the interstate. I asked which routes. He named two. I told him one of them had a bridge out. I'd seen it marked on a county map 2 days ago. I told him the other would take us 80 miles south and add 4 hours and bring us around on the far side of Grand Island, which had been one of the spots mentioned as severely impacted on the radio. He said I didn't know that for sure. I said he was right. I didn't know that for sure, but driving directly toward a city of 50,000 people with unknown levels of infection seemed less appealing than going through a blockage I could deal with using equipment I already had. There was a silence. Helen, the teacher, said, "The truck driver makes sense." Kyle nodded. Lori said, "I agree with Brett." Pete didn't say anything else, but he looked at me in a way that I filed away. We left at 6 a.m. the next morning. Recording. Wednesday, 7:15 a.m. Day 7. We're on I-80, east. Getting everyone loaded was organized chaos. We set up a system. Garrett at the trailer doors with a checklist. Me at the cab checking the route one more time. Kyle making sure people brought only what they could carry, because space in the trailer was real. 14 people and their accumulated bags and supplies squeezed into the back third of a trailer that still had about 8 pallets of commercial freight in the front section. It's not ideal. The trailer doesn't have heat. November in Nebraska. But everyone had layers on, and I had the engine running, so there was at least some heat through the trailer walls, and it was going to be maybe 2 hours, 2.5 at most. Better than freezing in a farm supply store. Helen organized the kids. Nora and her sister, the 7-year-old was named Katie, sat together against the trailer wall on a folded tarp. Nora still had her book. Jake, the teenager, was pretending he was fine with all of this. Pete and Donna sat near the doors, where Pete could see out the small gap. Lori sat next to Angie, the mother. Garrett was up front with me. On-ramp to I-80 was clear. First 6 miles were slow going. Cars stopped in both lanes, but not densely. I could weave between them at about 15 miles per hour, and nothing moving on or near the road. Garrett had a pair of binoculars. He watched ahead while I drove. We didn't talk much. After about 10 minutes of highway, I said, "Tell me about the depot again." He said, "What specifically?" I said, "Walk me through what it looked like when you left." He was quiet for a second. Then, "It's a 3-building complex. Fence around the perimeter, chain link 8 feet. The main building has loading bays on the south side, offices above. When I left, there were 41 people. Food for maybe 3 weeks at that count. Generator fuel. A well on the property, not on the grid, pump-fed, so it still works. Medical supplies in the office building." I said, "You left 2 days ago." "Yes. Why?" A pause. "We needed people who could run supply operations." Who knew the road networks? Most of the people there were civilian. I came back to find drivers, people with trucks, people who could navigate. I said, "And you hadn't heard from them since you left?" He said, "The radio contact has been intermittent." I heard what he wasn't saying. I've been around enough people long enough to know when someone is giving me the true facts without giving me what the true facts might add up to. I said, "When was the last clear contact?" He said, 31 hours ago. 31 hours. I kept driving. Recording. Wednesday, 8:45 a.m. Day 7, mid-morning. The blockage at mile 318 was worse than Garrett's description, and better than my worst case. I could see it from about a mile out, a cluster of vehicles across all 3 lanes. And this section of I-80 has 3 eastbound lanes at that point, which matters, because I had to make a path through at least 1 lane's width. The pile was centered on what had been a serious accident, maybe 8 or 10 vehicles total, at least 2 semi-trucks in there. The front one jackknifed across lanes 1 and 2, its trailer at a 45-degree angle. Behind and around it, cars, an SUV on its side, a minivan pressed against the Jersey barrier. Most had been pushed slightly by other vehicles that had stopped behind them. The whole thing looked like a compression, all that stopped traffic pressing forward and stopping. I could also see, from a distance, about 30 figures in and around the vehicles. They were doing that thing, that specific not doing anything thing, milling between the stopped cars, orienting occasionally toward sounds, then stopping. I pulled over about 3/4 of a mile back and got out to look through Garrett's binoculars. Garrett came up beside me. Kyle was out of the trailer and standing on the running board of the truck, watching. I looked through the binoculars for a long time. The jackknifed semi in the center, its trailer was basically blocking lanes 1 and 2, but the space between its front bumper and the Jersey barrier on the left side was wider than it looked from a distance. About 14 feet, I thought. Maybe a little more. My truck is 8 feet 6 inches wide. My trailer, with the mirrors folded, is 8 feet. I needed 12 feet minimum, 15 to do it comfortably. The issue was the SUV on its side, which had slid into that gap from the far side. If I could get that SUV moved, or if I could get around the trailer's bumper end, I had room. I said to Garrett, "We're going through the left side gap. I'm going to need to move one vehicle first, the SUV." He asked how I was going to do that. I said, "I'm going to push it." Kyle said, "What about them?" Meaning the 30-some figures in the blockage. I said, "I'm going to push it fast." Recording. Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. I'm going to try to describe what happened in the next 20 minutes, without it sounding fake, because it was real, and I remember every second of it. I backed the Kenworth up about 100 yards to give myself a clear run. I told Garrett to get back in the cab and on the radio, and not to open the trailer door until I told him to. I told Kyle to get in the trailer and keep everyone calm, and if the trailer door opened before I said it was okay, to seal it from the inside. Kyle looked at me. He said, "What do I tell them?" I said, "Tell them there's going to be some bumping and to hold on." I got back in the cab, gripped the wheel, took a breath. The thing I know about pushing with a commercial truck, it's something you learn when you've been doing this long enough, is that the truck doesn't care what's in front of it, as much as the thing in front of it cares about the truck. The Kenworth T680 weighs about 35,000 pounds empty, and with my load on, I was closer to 60,000. The overturned SUV probably weighed about 5,000 pounds, maybe less. The physics were not complicated. What was complicated was the 30-some infected standing in and around that gap. They reacted to my engine when I accelerated. All of them, every single one, oriented toward me at once, and for a second, I had the unnerving experience of watching 30 heads turn in unison, like a flock of birds, all tracking the same sound. Then they started walking, toward me. I accelerated to 30 miles an hour. The thing about 30 miles an hour in a 60,000-pound truck is that it doesn't feel fast from inside, but it looks extremely fast if you're standing in front of it. They didn't move out of the way. That's important to know, and I say it without satisfaction. They walked toward the truck, and the truck hit them, and they went down under, or around the bumper, and I kept going. And I am not going to describe the specifics of what happened to them, because I don't need to, and it doesn't help anyone to know. I hit the SUV at about 25 miles an hour. The impact was significant. The SUV scraped across the pavement and lodged against the Jersey barrier, and I pushed it another 10 feet until it was fully clear. I felt the impact through my whole body, my teeth, my spine. Something fell off a shelf in the sleeper. Then I was through the gap, through the blockage. I had about 200 yards of clear lane ahead before more stopped vehicles, spread out enough to navigate through. I stopped. I honked once. I got on the radio and said, "Garrett, open the doors." In the mirror, I could see the trailer doors open. Then I heard, from inside the trailer, Nora's voice, very clear. She said, "Is that it?" And Kyle said, "Yeah." That's it. And she said, okay. That's it. Okay. I drove. Recording, Wednesday, 1:15 p.m. We were through the worst of the blockage by 9:30. The rest of I-80 east of that point was rough going. Lots of navigating around stopped vehicles, but nothing that required what the mile 318 moment required. I kept the speed low, maybe 15 miles an hour, and worked my way east mile by mile. The infected on the highway in that section were scattered, not clustered. Individual or pairs, moving through the stopped cars the way they always moved. They oriented toward the truck's engine. I drove around them when I could, and slowed down when I couldn't. Nobody came close to the cab windows in a way that required action. Garrett was quiet through most of this. He watched through the binoculars. He gave me occasional information about what he could see ahead. He was useful in the cab, and I was glad he was there. We hit the exit for the freight depot at about noon. Exit 312. I've been through this exit before. The service road east of the interchange takes you through a flat stretch with a couple warehouses, and then to the depot complex about a mile off the highway. There's a water tower, a grain elevator in the distance, and then the fence line. I could see the fence from the off-ramp. I slowed down. Garrett had the binoculars up. I said, "What do you see?" He didn't answer right away. The gates of the depot complex were open, not propped open for arrivals open, just open. Both halves swung back against the fence, like someone had driven through them without stopping. I stopped the truck on the service road about 300 yards from the gate. I let the engine idle down. Garrett said, "I see movement." I said, "What kind?" He said, "I don't think those are our people." I said, "How many?" He counted. He said, "At least a dozen. Inside the perimeter, maybe more." Recording, Wednesday, 1:45 p.m. I drove close enough to see with my own eyes. 200 yards out, stopped again. The loading bays on the south side of the main building, 3 of them, roll-up doors. 2 of the 3 doors were open. The lights inside were off. Through the binoculars I could see the interior was dark. There were figures in the lot, 15, maybe 18, moving the way they moved. Slow, directionless, periodically stopping and then starting again. No people on the fence. No activity at the office building. No sounds of engines or generators. The depot had been overrun. 31 hours ago, Garrett had last had contact. 31 hours was a long time for something to go wrong, and go very wrong, and then go quiet. I sat with the engine idling for a long time. Garrett sat next to me. Neither of us said anything. Then Garrett said, "The fuel." I said, "I know." The tank gauge showed 1/8. I'd been stretching it, keeping the speed low, and the last 100 miles had eaten through more than I'd wanted. 1/8 of a tank on a Kenworth saddle tanks is maybe 50, 60 miles. Maybe. 50 to 60 miles. Garrett said, "We need to tell the others." Recording, Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. I pulled the truck off the service road into a gravel patch behind a low concrete building that might have been a pump house or a small utility shed. It gave me some cover from the depot's sightline. I got out and opened the trailer doors. 14 people blinking in the cold afternoon light. Helen, with her organized calm. Kyle, looking immediately at me for information. Angie holding both her daughter's hands. Pete with that particular look. I told them straight. The depot is overrun. I don't know if any of the people who were there got out. We have 50 to 60 miles of fuel. Helen said, "What are our options?" Pete said, "Options," with a specific edge to the word. I said, "Option 1. We try to clear the depot. It's risky. We don't know how many are inside the buildings. If there are a lot, we can't handle them with what we have. Option 2. We take the fuel we have and head south toward the smaller towns. Try to find a safe location. Forage for more fuel or supplies. Option 3. I drive east. Try to find another consolidated group or a safe zone that the radio traffic suggested might exist around Lincoln or beyond." Helen said, "What does the radio say?" I said, "The radio says conflicting things." Yesterday afternoon, I picked up something suggesting Lincoln still has areas with power. That's 100 miles from here. Kyle said, 100 miles. We have 50. I said, I know. Pete said, then we take the depot. Garrett said, Pete. Pete said, listen, the guy at the truck stop, he said what, 15, 18 of them? I counted 6 guns in this group, including my own. 6 guns versus 15 of them? We've handled worse. Lori said, have you? Pete said, I've been hunting since I was 12. I know how to handle a firearm. Kyle said quietly, these aren't deer. The silence stretched. I looked at Nora, sitting on the edge of the trailer with her Alice book in her lap. She was looking at me, not scared, waiting, the way kids wait when they trust that adults will figure it out. I said, I want to look at the depot from the north perimeter before we make any decision. Kyle, you come with me. Everyone else stays in the truck. Pete started to say something. I looked at him and he stopped. Kyle and I took the binoculars and went on foot. Recording, Wednesday, 4 p.m. What Kyle and I saw from the north side of the fence changed the calculation. The north fence line faced the back side of the main building, and from there, we could see the loading dock area on the building's north side, which was different from the south. 2 vehicles, a white box truck and a flatbed, were parked at the north dock, backed in. The dock doors on the north side were closed. The padlock on the nearest dock door was locked. Someone had locked those doors from the inside, after the gate breach. We moved along the fence to get a view of the north office annex, a small building attached to the main structure by a covered walkway. 2nd floor of the annex. 1 window, curtains drawn, but with a specific quality of darkness that I recognized. The darkness of a covered window versus the darkness of a dark room. Something was blocking that window from the inside. I signaled Kyle. He nodded, saw it too. There was also a gutter downspout on the north side of the annex, and on the concrete apron below it, recently enough not to have been rained on, there were marks. Someone sliding down. Someone who had come down from that window and onto the concrete, and then the scuff marks led to the fence. Cut wire, 1 section. Big enough for a person, not a truck. Someone had gotten out through the north fence on foot, recently. I said to Kyle, there are people inside. He said, hiding, I said. Those dock doors were locked from inside. The window, someone's up there. He looked at the infected in the lot, still moving, still directionless. He said, we can't get to them without going through the lot. I said, not in the truck. He said, on foot? I looked at the 15 or so infected in the lot. I thought about the sound that those infected made, and how they tracked sound, and how they didn't track light, and didn't seem to track smell. Sound was what mattered. I said, silently, in through the cut fence. 1 person, fast and quiet. He said, I'll go. I said, no, I need you back at the truck. He said, Brett. I said, I'm not being brave, I'm being practical. If something goes wrong with me, you need to be the one who drives that truck. You have military experience, you know the route. I'm going in, you go back. He looked at me. Then he said, okay, but if you're not back in 20 minutes, I'm coming in. I said, give me 30. Recording, Wednesday, 4:55 p.m. I came back in 22 minutes. I'm shaking as I record this, but it's adrenaline, not injury. I'm not hurt. I'm in the cab. I want to tell this while it's sharp. Going through the cut fence was the easy part. Staying low, moving slow, no sounds. The infected in the lot were about 60 yards away when I came through the fence, and none of them oriented toward me. I pressed against the north wall of the main building and slid along it toward the annex. The annex door, ground-level metal door, was locked. I found a window beside it, small, translucent panel, the kind of industrial window that you can pop with the right pressure on the frame. I'd done it before at loading docks when dock managers forgot their keys. I popped it open, slow, no sound. Inside, an equipment room, air handling units, pipes, junction boxes, and a door on the far side, slightly ajar. I went through, The hallway beyond was dark, and I held still for 30 seconds before I moved again. At the end of the hall, stairs, concrete. I went up one flight. At the top, a corridor, 3 doors. First one locked. Second one, the knob turned. I pushed it slowly. There were 9 people in the room. They were clustered in the center of the floor, away from the window, sitting and lying on office furniture they'd dragged into a rough circle. They'd been there, from the look of them, the number of empty water bottles, the smell, at least a day and a half, maybe 2 days. 9 people. They looked at me like I was something impossible. The one nearest to me, a woman, maybe 55, steady-looking, the kind of steady that's been through several hours of panic and has come out the other side. She said, "Is that a truck out there?" I said yes. She said, "Is it running?" I said yes. She said, "Then you need to get us out of here, because we have a woman in the corner who's been diabetic for 11 years, and she ate the last of her glucose tabs this morning." Recording, Thursday, 12:30 a.m., day 8, just past midnight. I'm recording this from the truck, parked on the grounds of a church in a town called Giltner, Nebraska. Population, according to the sign, 412. It's dark and quiet, and we've been here for 3 hours, and so far nothing has found us. There are 23 people now, my 14, plus the 9 from the depot annex. The depot didn't have 41 people anymore. The woman who spoke to me was named Vera, and she said what happened was, the gate breach happened almost exactly 31 hours ago, before dawn, when a group of infected found the gate and pushed through the gap left by a supply-run vehicle that hadn't fully secured the latch. It had been fast. Most of the 41 people had been asleep. Vera's group had been the ones already awake, working the early supply shift. They'd had maybe 30 seconds before the lot was compromised, and they'd gotten 9 of them into the annex and up the stairs, and that was as many as they could manage. The others, 32 other people. Vera didn't finish that sentence. I didn't ask her to. The diabetic woman in the corner was named Ruth, and she was barely conscious when we carried her out on a makeshift stretcher, made from coats and a wooden pallet. Lori, the veterinarian, got to her immediately, checked her, said she needed glucose and fast. Donna, Pete's wife, who turned out to be a complete different human being from her husband when the situation required, had a bag of hard candy in her pack, and she gave it all to Lori, and Lori figured out how to get some of the sugar absorbed fast enough to help. Ruth came around. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Lori and said, "You're a doctor." Lori said, "Vet." Ruth said, "Same thing. We got everyone out through the cut fence, section by section." Kyle stood watch on the south side of the building, not because he could do much, but because he could see, and I needed eyes. Garrett coordinated at the fence. I went back and forth through the cut wire 9 times, once per person. The infected in the lot milled around. Once, toward the end, 2 of them drifted in our direction and got within 20 feet of the fence before they stopped and stood there, as if they'd lost the thread of whatever had attracted them. I pressed against the fence and didn't move and didn't breathe for almost a full minute. They turned and walked back into the lot. 23 people in and on the truck. Fuel at 1/8 of a tank. I drove south and then west on county roads until I found Giltner. There's a church here with a parking lot and a cemetery behind it, and the town has been dark since we arrived. Vera said she knows there are fuel storage tanks at farm supply operations scattered throughout this region. Her husband had been a farmer before he died, and she knew the specifics of local infrastructure. She said a cooperative elevator outside a town called Aurora, about 20 miles east, had a large diesel reserve. Tomorrow morning. First light, 20 miles. I'm going to sleep for 4 hours. I keep almost saying goodnight to you out loud, like you're on the other side of the bunk. Old habit. Good night, Amy. Recording, Thursday, 7 a.m., day 8. Something happened overnight, I have to tell you. I was asleep. 4 hours, dreamless, the immediate and gone kind of sleep that comes after a day like that one. Then something woke me at about 4 a.m., not a sound, or not primarily a sound, more like a change in the quality of the silence. I sat up in the bunk and listened. The people in the trailer. I'd left the trailer doors cracked for air, put Kyle in charge of monitoring through the gap. The people in the trailer were quiet. They'd been quiet for hours. The sound that was wrong was coming from outside, from the church. It wasn't the infected sound. It wasn't footsteps. It was quiet enough that I almost talked myself into thinking I'd imagined it, except that I'd gotten enough nights in this truck by now to know the difference between what I imagine and what's real. It was organ music. Faint, barely there, but organ music, coming from inside the church. Not recorded, live. Someone was playing it, slowly, like a person playing in the dark, hitting the keys carefully one at a time, with the pedal all the way down so each note lasted as long as possible. Sustained notes bleeding into each other, no recognizable hymn, just notes. I got the tire iron and got out of the cab as quietly as I could. I went to the side door of the church and tried the handle, unlocked. Inside it was almost totally dark except for a single candle burning at the altar end of the nave. The organ was at the back, and there was someone sitting at it, small, hunched over the keys, playing with very deliberate, one note at a time care. She was maybe 70, white hair pulled back in a bun, a sweater over a house dress. She turned when she heard me come in, very slowly, the way people turn when their necks hurt. She said, "I didn't think anyone would come." Her name was Lucille Ames. She had lived in Giltner for 61 years. She had been alone in this town for 6 days. She'd been playing the organ every morning before dawn for the past 4 days, because, she said, it was the only thing that made any sense. I sat in the front pew for a while and let her play. I didn't have the heart to tell her the organ music might attract attention. It was soft enough, and the walls were thick enough, and 4 in the morning in rural Nebraska is quiet enough that I thought the risk was small. Small. We brought her with us, obviously. She sat in the cab between Garrett and me with her house dress and her sweater and her small canvas bag, and she did not say another word until we were on the road. Recording. Thursday, 11:30 a.m. The fuel depot at the Aurora Cooperative Elevator. Good news first. We found it. Vera's directions were exact. Down to the turn onto the access road and the color of the pump housing. Red, she said. It's red. It was red. There was fuel in it, a lot of it. I filled both saddle tanks completely, and we also found a trailer-mounted fuel bladder, a big flexible tank used to transport diesel to equipment in the field, sitting on a flatbed near the elevator. We filled that too. That's probably another 150 gallons tied to the back of my trailer. Heavy, but usable. That's range. That's choices. Here's the complication. While we were at the elevator, while the fuel was running, and Garrett and Kyle were watching the perimeter, and Vera was helping organize the people in the trailer who needed food and water, Pete came up to me. He'd been quiet since the depot, since I'd overruled him about clearing the depot, which in retrospect turned out to be the right call because there were more infected in the building's interior than anyone had counted on, something Vera confirmed when I asked her about it. But Pete didn't want to talk about the depot. He wanted to talk about where we were going. He said, "Lincoln." I said, "That's one option." "Yes." He said, "It's not an option. It's what we're doing. My brother is in Lincoln. Donna's parents are in Lincoln. We're going to Lincoln." I said, "I've been picking up signals from a group operating around the Platte River east of Columbus. Could be another safe point, further north, but..." He said, "That's north. Lincoln is east." "We're going east," I said. "Pete, nobody elected anyone here. I understand you want to find your family. So do I. But I'm driving the truck, and we're going to make decisions together." He said, "Your family isn't on this truck." That landed. He meant it to. I could tell by the fraction of a second of something crossing his face after he said it. Not regret, but awareness. He knew it was a strike, and he landed it on purpose. I said, "No, they're not." And then I turned back to the fuel pump. Garrett came up beside me a minute later and said quietly, "He won't cause a problem." I said, "He might." Garrett said, "Then we'll handle it when it comes." Recording. Thursday, 3:45 p.m. We're moving east on Highway 34. toward Lincoln. Pete got what he wanted because when we put it to the group, Lincoln had the most votes, and I'd said we'd make decisions together, so Lincoln is about 75 miles east. The radio traffic on Channel 19 has gotten more consistent. There's a coordinated group operating in Lincoln. It sounds like they've got part of the city organized, the university area, which makes sense because the university has buildings designed for large groups and resources, and the layout is defensible if you know what you're doing. Lincoln has 7-something thousand people at the university alone, before this started. Now, who knows? But the signals are coming from that direction, and they're structured, they're organized. Someone is coordinating. The roads from here to there. I've driven them, before. In normal circumstances, empty roads, 1 hour. Now, I don't know. The last 20 miles into any city is always going to be the hardest part. The density increases, the roads narrow, the infected cluster, wherever the population was. We'll stop before the city proper tonight. Come in at dawn, that's the plan. Nora is doing a thing that Paige does. She found a way to prop her book against her knees and read while the trailer is in motion, even when the ride is rough. Paige does that, same exact posture, knees up, book propped. I saw it when I did the head count at the last stop, and it hit me somewhere that I wasn't expecting. I want to go home. I am going home. I just need to get these people settled first, and then I am going to figure out how to get to Omaha, and I am going to be standing in my own kitchen in some number of days. I don't know what number yet, and you are going to make me something with real food in it, and I'm going to sit at the kitchen table, and I'm not going to move for about 6 hours. Keep the coffee going. Recording. Thursday, 9:50 p.m. Day 8, night. We're camped on the grounds of a grain complex outside a town called Seward, about 25 miles from Lincoln. I drove until the light got bad, and then pulled into this property, which is fenced and empty, and has a water access point I found by walking the perimeter. Everyone is in the trailer. Vera organized the night watch rotation, which I thought was impressive given she'd barely slept in 2 days. Kyle and Jake the teenager are doing first watch outside. Lori is monitoring Ruth, who is stable now, eating and drinking, the glucose scare yesterday receding. Lucille played a small recorder she had in her bag, the wooden flute kind, not the recording device kind, very softly, inside the trailer, after the little ones were settled to sleep. She played one song, I don't know what song, something slow. When she stopped, Nora said, "Can you play it again?" She played it again. I sat in the cab and listened through the open slider between cab and bunk. I have to tell you something about this past week. I've been trying to find the right way to say it, and I'm not sure there is one, so I'm going to say it crooked, and you can figure it out. When this started, I was a long-haul trucker finishing a run. That's all I was in those first hours. A guy trying to get home, calculating fuel and mileage and route, like it was any other night. And maybe that's all any of us are. Whatever we were the moment before it changed, and then trying to figure out what to be after. I think about Dex Holt, the thermos, the way he tilted it back expecting coffee, and found it empty, and did it again anyway. The absolute ordinariness of that. I think about Linda Henderson touching the hinge on her glasses chain, the thing her hands did without her knowing while she talked about Dale. I think about Thomas Briggs, loading seed bags, and not letting me come with him. I think about those 32 people at the depot. I think about Nora's book. Here's what I know, Amy. Here is what I know with certainty after 8 days of this. People are not always good at the crisis moment. Pete, for instance, the men at Kelly's window. But people are often very good right before and right after, in the ordinary spaces around the crisis. And those ordinary spaces are bigger than you'd think. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't bring back what's been lost. I'm not trying to make this hopeful in a fake way. I'm just saying, the thing that's kept me going, the thing that keeps me from letting the weight of all of it crush me flat, is that I keep seeing the ordinary in between. Lucille at her organ, Nora's book, Ruth saying same thing, Kyle saying, yeah, that's it. 23 people, 24 counting me. Tomorrow we go into Lincoln. Recording. Friday, 5:30 a.m. Day 9. Pre-dawn. I want to tell you about the route into Lincoln before we do it, while it's still theoretical, because once we're moving, things happen fast and I'll miss details. Highway 34 from the east takes us in from a direction that avoids the downtown core. That's important. The core of any city is going to be the worst for density. We'll come in through the southeastern residential zones and then cut north on Highway 77 toward the university area. The university sits in the north center of the city, bounded by freeways on two sides. It's essentially an island of campus. The radio signals I've been tracking all suggest the organized group is around 14th and R. That's right in the center of campus, near the main administration area. I've been near the university area twice on deliveries over the years. Not well enough to navigate it on memory, but well enough to recognize landmarks. Distance from here, about 25 miles. If the roads are passable all the way in, an hour. If we have to clear anything or redirect, could be 3 or 4 hours. Fuel, topped up, not a concern for today. Weapons, 6 firearms across the group. Kyle had been doing an inventory and a training session yesterday afternoon with the people who were least comfortable. Lori was the best shot of the group after Kyle himself, which surprised everyone except Lori. Infected density, unknown for the city. Last night I was picking up reports on Channel 19, suggesting that the city's north and east sides were more manageable than the south and west. The university had been doing some kind of organized operation in the past few days to clear the immediate campus perimeter, according to fragments I caught. I don't know how effective that's been. Unknown factor, Pete. I've been awake for an hour thinking about Pete, and I'm going to be direct with myself about it. Pete is not a stupid man. He's a man who's used to being the authority in whatever room he's in, and he's not handling this setup well. The setup being that I'm the one making the route calls. He hasn't done anything overtly wrong. He's done the night watch. He helped carry Ruth out of the depot. He's not cruel to people, but there's a quality to his watchfulness that I'm tracking. His brother is in Lincoln. He's been waiting a week to get here. When we arrive, that pressure valve opens, and I don't know which direction. Okay, 23 people and me. Let's go. Recording. Friday, 8:50 a.m. The approach to Lincoln. We came in on 34 East, and the road was rough. Not blocked the way I-80 had been, but dotted with abandoned vehicles, the occasional barrier people had put up and then left. I kept the speed to 20 and worked through them. Kyle in the trailer had organized the adults in a row along the side wall so they could hear and respond if needed. The first serious trouble was at the junction where 34 meets I-80 on the south side of the city. Big interchange, multiple on-ramps, the usual gas stations and fast food on the service road. The gas stations were burned out, the fast food places were dark, and in the interchange itself, in the bowl of ramps and flyovers, something had happened that I don't think I can adequately describe, except to say that a lot of people had tried to use that interchange, and a lot of them had not made it. I didn't go through the interchange. I took a surface street parallel, going north, past residential neighborhoods. The neighborhoods were quiet, not deserted quiet. Curtained windows, 1 or 2 cars in drives, signs of current occupation. Whether those occupations were by the living or not, I couldn't tell from the road. At 84th Street going north, I spotted the first organized sign of human activity. A cloth banner hung between 2 telephone poles over the road. White background, blue spray paint. It said, University District, Safe Passage North, Tune CB9, Channel 9. I switched, static, then a voice, woman, young, businesslike, saying, "This is the Lincoln Coordination Network, broadcasting from UNL campus. If you are approaching from the South Corridor on 84th Street, please maintain speed and heading. Do not stop. Route is maintained but time sensitive. You will be met at Vine Street intersection. Repeat, do not stop before Vine." I said to Garrett, "Hold on." He said, "What?" I said, "We're moving now, and we're not stopping." The 14 blocks between that banner and Vine Street were, okay, tense. There were infected on some blocks and not others. The pattern random. At 70th and Pioneers Boulevard there was a cluster of maybe 40, that came off a side street toward the sound of my engine. I accelerated through, and they were behind us in 8 seconds. Kyle later told me there were people in the trailer who didn't make a sound during that, because they'd been coached to be quiet, and they held it, even when the truck swayed, and things hit the trailer sides. Vine Street intersection had 2 pickup trucks parked across it, with 3 people on the hoods, and as I pulled up, they pulled the trucks aside to let me through, and one of them pointed north. I followed the direction. 2 blocks later, the university. Recording, Friday, 11:15 a.m. I don't have enough time right now to tell you everything about the university setup, because there's a lot happening and people need me for various things. But I want to give you the short version now and the long version later. The Lincoln Coordination Network had about 650 people in the university district. They'd been building it for a week. The woman on the radio, her name was Dr. Abigail Mercer. She was a civil engineering professor who'd essentially become the operational lead by default because she was the one who knew how to calculate load capacities and drainage and power generation, had created a supply map of the entire campus, marked what was accessible and what wasn't, organized labor into teams, and set up a communication hub in the campus radio station that still had working equipment. She met me at the truck. She was 46, I think. She looked like someone who'd been working without sleep, which she probably had. She looked at the truck, at all of it, the fuel bladder trailer, the modifications I'd made to the cab, the dimensions, with a very specific engineer's eye. She said, "How far did you come?" I said, "Started outside Wichita 10 days ago." She said, "Did you drive through any major city centers?" I said, "No, I went around everything I could." She said, "Smart," like she meant it. We got everyone off the truck and processed into the network's intake system, a check for injuries, a brief questionnaire about what skills people had, an assignment to a housing area. The campus had several large buildings they were using, the student union being the main one, with a large kitchen already operational on generator power. Ruth got to a medical team within 5 minutes of arriving. Nora's mother, Angie, found a quiet corner of the union building and sat down on the floor with both her daughters and put an arm around each of them, and the 3 of them sat there for about 20 minutes without moving. I walked past them twice. Both times they were in the same position. Recording, Friday, 1:30 p.m. Pete found his brother. I want to tell you this because it surprised me. I expected the reunion to be, I don't know what I expected. Explosive maybe, or loud. Pete being Pete. His brother was at the intake area when we arrived, because it turned out Pete had gotten a message through the CB network the night before, and his brother, whose name was David, quieter, thinner, wearing glasses, had been watching for us. They saw each other, and Pete stopped walking. David stopped walking. They stood 10 feet apart. And Pete, the man who'd been pressing and pushing and angling for authority and trying to steer the direction of every decision for 6 days, Pete just completely broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just collapsed in on himself, shoulders first, and put his face in his hands, and made no sound at all. David went to him, put both hands on his shoulders. I turned away because it wasn't mine to watch. I went back to the truck. Recording, Friday, 4 p.m. I've been in a meeting with Dr. Mercer and Garrett and 2 other people from the network for the past 2 hours. This is what came out of it. The network needs trucks. Specifically, it needs trucks that can run supply operations between the university area and the rural sources that Vera and others know about. The fuel at the cooperative elevator I found, the farm infrastructure scattered through the area, all of it accessible if you have a truck driver who knows the roads and knows how to navigate safely. Dr. Mercer asked me if I'd stay. I said, "My family is in Omaha." She said, "I know. We're trying to establish contact with organized groups in Omaha. We've had some signal. Nothing confirmed." I said, "I need to know if they're okay." She said, "I understand. Help us build the network stronger, and we can get you better information. Give us 2 weeks." I said, "I can't promise 2 weeks." She said, "Give me what you can." Recording, Saturday, 6 a.m., day 10. actually recording from outside the truck for the first time in a while. Standing in a university parking lot, coffee cup in my hand. Actual coffee, real coffee, from actual beans, percolated on an actual generator-powered machine in the union kitchen. I cannot tell you what that tastes like after 10 days. I genuinely cannot. I told Dr. Mercer I'd do 1 week. 7 days of supply runs, helping train other drivers in the network on what I know about route selection and navigation, contributing my fuel reserve to the common pool. 7 days. And then I drive to Omaha. She accepted that. Garrett is staying. He's found his element here. The logistics, the organization, the coordination across multiple groups. He's good at it. The network is going to do better with him here. Kyle is staying too. He looked at me when I said I was leaving in a week and said, "You're coming back, right?" Like a kid asking. I said I'd try. He nodded, like that was an acceptable answer. Vera has become something already. Within 12 hours of arriving, she knew the names of 30 people and had organized the incoming group into the housing assignment with less friction than the network's existing system. Dr. Mercer noticed immediately. Vera looked mildly amused at being noticed. Lucille is playing the piano in the student union lobby every evening. The first night she did it, there were 6 people listening. The second night, 40. Ruth is recovering. She's going to need consistent glucose management, but Lori found a supply of diabetic medication in the University Medical Center that was only partially depleted. Lori is now essentially running a clinic out of that medical center with 2 pre-med students as assistants. Nora's book is done. I saw her finish it this morning, sitting on a low concrete wall outside the union with the sun on her face, turning the last page. She sat for a moment after. Then she looked up and saw me watching her, and she said, "I've read it 4 times. I said, "Was it better the 4th time?" She said, "No, but it was more comfortable." I thought about that for a while. Recording. Day 11, evening. I did my first supply run today. 2 other drivers in the network, a man named Dennis who'd driven school buses for 12 years and who was learning commercial vehicle operation very fast, and a woman named Pat who'd hauled livestock and wasn't afraid of anything I'd met so far, came with me in their vehicles. The route was 30 miles west to the grain elevator I'd already used. Straightforward in good conditions. In these conditions, I took the lead and they followed. And I did what I do, which is read the road constantly and call changes before they need to happen. We brought back 600 gallons of diesel, 300 gallons of water in containers, 2 pallets of canned goods from an abandoned distribution warehouse that Vera had mapped, and a hand truck, 2 generators, and a pile of extension cords from a farm supply store we'd found previously uninvestigated. 3 hours, no casualties, a few close moments on the road going west where we hit a denser stretch of infected and I had to call an alternate route back, but nothing we couldn't manage. Dennis said afterward, "You make it look easy." I said, "It's not easy. I just don't show it." He laughed. I like Dennis. Recording. Day 12. Morning. A thing happened yesterday that I need to tell you about, because I think it changes the shape of this whole story, and I've been sitting with it overnight. We picked up a transmission on Channel 19 at about 4 p.m. during the supply run return trip. I was focused on the road, so Garrett, he'd come along to help coordinate, was monitoring the radio. He said, "Brett, come back on 17. I switched. A voice, male, older, faint but clear enough. The voice was identifying itself as coming from an organized settlement in eastern Nebraska, Fremont specifically. Fremont is about 30 miles north of Omaha, a city of maybe 30,000 before. The voice said they had a stable community, about 2,000 people in a secured section of the city, that had been operating for 8 days. They had power, water, medical. They were in contact with a group in Omaha. In Omaha, he said, we have radio contact with about 300 survivors, coordinated in the Millard area. Millard is a suburb of Omaha, southwest side. Amy, your mom lives 11 miles from Millard. Recording. Day 12, evening. I tried to reach the Fremont contact for 3 hours this afternoon. Signal kept fading. I got a few more pieces. The group in Millard was organized around a community center and a high school. 300 people. Food and water holding for now. I don't know if you and Paige are in that group. I don't know if your mom is there. 300 people in a metro area is a small number. I don't know what happened to the rest of the Omaha Metro, and I'm not letting myself think about that right now. What I know is this. There are people in the Millard area. There is organization there. There is contact from Fremont that suggests the area is not entirely lost. I told Dr. Mercer this evening. I told her I'm leaving in 4 days, not 7. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." She said, "I want you to take Dennis and one other truck. You'll be more useful to Fremont as a convoy than alone, and they can use the supply vehicles." I said, "I don't want to take resources from your network." She said, "You're not. You're extending it." I said, "How far north?" She said, "Fremont first. Then we'll see what connects from there." I said, "Okay." Recording, day 13, afternoon. Something happened on the supply run today that I need to get down while it's fresh, and then I'm going to come back and tell you about the other thing. We went south today instead of west. There's a food distribution center about 18 miles south of Lincoln, on the eastern edge of a small town called Crete, that Dr. Mercer had on her supply map as unconfirmed, potentially large stock. I went with Dennis and Pat again, and Kyle came along this time for the security piece. The distribution center was real. Loading bays. A big refrigerated section that was now obviously not refrigerated, but still had a massive dry goods warehouse attached that hadn't been touched. We spent 2 hours loading. More canned goods than I've seen in one place since this started. Rice, flour, cooking oil in bulk. Coffee. 10 cases of coffee. I will not pretend I didn't immediately secure 2 of those cases in my own truck. But on the way back, on a county road running north, we came through a crossroads that I hadn't seen on the way out because we'd taken a different route, and at the crossroads there was a truck parked. Old model, maybe mid-90s, a plain commercial box truck, white, painted over windows, parked off the road at an angle that suggested it hadn't been driven in a while. Dennis came over the radio. "Brett, you see it?" I said I did. I stopped. I looked at it through the binoculars. No visible damage. No visible figures in or around it. The rear roll-up door was down. One of the painted-over side windows had an unpainted strip at the bottom, 4 inches high, probably a gap in the paint job, and in that gap, just barely, I could see light from inside. Not electric light, candlelight, or something warmer. Someone was inside. I told Dennis and Pat to stay put, and I got out with Kyle. We approached from the back, and Kyle knocked on the roll-up door. Not loudly, carefully. Knocked twice, and then we both stepped back. Silence. Kyle knocked again. A muffled voice from inside said something I couldn't parse through the metal door. Then the roll-up door went up about 18 inches, and a face appeared. Woman, maybe 30. Dirty blonde hair, a cut on her cheek that had healed roughly. She looked at Kyle, then at me. She looked at the trucks. She said, "How many of you?" I said, "4 of us, plus 23 people at a safe location." She said, "Are you with the university group?" I said, "Yes." She said, "We've been trying to reach them." We. She lifted the door the rest of the way. Inside the box truck, and this is not something I'm going to forget, there were 11 people, and a dog, and a baby. The baby was maybe 6 months old, in a car seat strapped to a cargo railing, asleep. The dog was an old chocolate Labrador who barely raised his head when the door went up. Her name was Julie. She'd been a teacher. The group had been in the truck for 5 days, moving between hiding spots, surviving off what they'd collected in the first 2 days. They'd been trying to drive north, toward whatever they were picking up on the radio, and the truck had run out of fuel. We refueled them from our reserve. We got them to Lincoln before dark. The baby slept through the whole thing. The dog's name was Hank. Recording. Day 14. Night. Day 14. 2 weeks. It doesn't feel like 2 weeks, and it feels like much longer than 2 weeks simultaneously, which I know doesn't make sense. There are now 741 people in the Lincoln University network. It went from 650 when we arrived to 740 now, because of the people we've brought in and the people who found their own way to the signal. It's not a city, but it's something. I'm leaving the day after tomorrow. Me, Dennis, Pat, 3 trucks. We're carrying supplies for Fremont and a list of radio contacts that Dr. Mercer has assembled from the network map. Garrett helped me plan the route north. He knows roads I don't know in that section. I said goodbye to most people today, individually, because I wanted to. Helen, the teacher, who's been running the assignment system and knows everybody's name. Roy Danner, the flatbed driver from day 1 in Concordia, who we'd gone back for. Roy and Becca's mom had made it to the Lincoln network on their own, 6 days after we'd left them in Phillipsburg, and Roy was now running heavy equipment for the network's perimeter work. Becca herself, who'd arrived a day later, and had immediately been assigned to the communication hub because of how she'd handled herself in crisis. I talked to each of them for just a few minutes. Didn't make it big. That's not how any of us operate anymore. Lucille was playing piano when I stopped by the Union lobby. I told her I was leaving, and she stopped playing and looked at me with that old neck turn and said, "You found some of us, you know?" I said, "You found yourselves. I just drove." She said, "Same thing, in this case." She patted my hand, then she went back to playing. Recording, day 14, late-eyed. I want to tell you something about the last 2 weeks that I've been circling and not landing on. Something that keeps coming up in different forms and I keep not saying directly. When this started, the night it started, on I-70, 40 miles out of Wichita with the emergency broadcast coming in, my whole brain went straight to the task. Route calculation, fuel level, supply inventory, the practical survival stuff. I thought that was just the job instinct kicking in. Truck driver's version of emergency response. Keep the vehicle moving, assess the route, account for the resources. But it wasn't only that. Looking back from 2 weeks on, I think I was also just not ready to look straight at it. At what it actually was, at the scale of it. So I looked at the road instead, and the road was right there, and concrete, and manageable. And I let everything else exist, just at the edge of where I was looking. Dex Holt. I've thought about him a lot. His empty thermos. His jokes about dispatch, the way he said he was going south and take care, and the way that turned out. There's a specific quality of guilt that comes with survival. Not the guilt of having done something wrong. I know I didn't cause any of this. But the guilt of the simple arithmetic. The subtraction. All the people who didn't make it out of those situations, and I did. Linda Henderson at her gas station. Thomas Briggs and his chickens. The 32 at the freight depot. All the people in those stopped cars on I-70. I wasn't better or more deserving or smarter. I had a big truck and specific knowledge and reasonable luck, and I kept moving, that's all. I'm going to carry that arithmetic. I think everybody who comes out of this is going to carry it. And I think the answer to what you do with it is what I've watched happen in this parking lot over the last week. You drive your truck for a purpose that's bigger than just keeping yourself moving. You use the specific thing you can do. The route knowledge, the road reading, the ability to hold a 40-ton vehicle steady in bad conditions, for something other than your own survival. That's all I've got. I want to go home. Recording. Day 15. Morning. The morning we leave for Fremont. 3 trucks lined up in the university's east parking lot. My Kenworth, Dennis's cargo van, not a commercial truck but he can handle it. Pat's livestock hauler. Kyle decided to come. Kyle said he felt like unfinished business, and he wanted to see it through. I said okay. We had radio contact with the Fremont group at 6 a.m. Clear signal. The voice was a man named Stewart, calm and organized. Said the road into Fremont on Highway 77 North was passable with some navigating around blockages near Wahoo, and that their perimeter teams would be watching for our approach and would guide us in. Stewart mentioned the Omaha contact again. I said I wanted to speak to whoever was running that communication. He said he'd arrange it. Garrett came out to the truck when I was doing my last checks. He stood there for a second. He said, "You're a good driver." I said, "I know." He laughed, which was good. He said, "Be careful on 77 near Wahoo. The interchange has a lot of slow-moving density, from what the radio is saying. Go slow and you'll be fine." I said, "When are you not?" He didn't say anything to that. He put out his hand, and I shook it. Then he walked away, and I got in the truck. Dr. Mercer was there too, standing back, letting me go. She held up a hand in a wave. Not a lot of ceremony. I backed out of the space. The Kenworth's air brakes hissed. I pulled forward, and Dennis fell in behind me, and Pat behind Dennis, and we went to the gate. The gate was opened by 2 of the perimeter crew. They stepped back. I went through. North on 77. Recording. Day 15. Midday. Wahoo gave us about 20 minutes of careful work at the interchange, exactly as Garrett had warned. Pat's livestock hauler is wide, and she held her ground. Didn't rush it. Came through clean. Dennis had one bad moment at an on-ramp, when a group of infected came off the shoulder, and he braked too hard, and fishtailed, but caught it, held it, came out straight. I told him on the radio, "Nice save." He said, "Don't tell my bus kids." We were north of Wahoo by 11, and the road opened up. Flat farmland, November bare, and the smell of the Platte River not far east. The sky was a particular color of gray that smelled like snow, and I remembered that it was mid-November, and wondered how this was going to change when winter came in earnest. A thing to plan for. A thing for the network to plan for. Stewart made radio contact at 11:30 and said he could see our dust cloud on the road south and to keep coming. He said their perimeter was clear. He said, "We're going to patch you through to the Millard contact in about 2 hours. Our communication schedule with them is 4 times daily, and the next window is at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. 2 hours. I drove faster. Recording. Day 15. 1:45 p.m. We're in Fremont. It's smaller than Lincoln's setup, maybe 900 people, but the infrastructure is different and in some ways more robust. They'd had more time to organize a specific section of the city, and the community here was more uniform, more local knowledge, more people who knew the geography and the resources. Stewart turned out to be Stuart Graham, a former Fremont City Public Works supervisor, who'd basically turned the city's municipal infrastructure into the community's backbone. Water lines, power from a section of grid they'd kept running on a rotating generator system, organized sanitation. This place was more sustainable than Lincoln in some ways. But that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm sitting in the communications room. It's 1:52 p.m. The radio is here, and the operator, a teenage girl who knows more about radio equipment than anyone I've met, is calibrating for the 2 p.m. contact with Millard. I have 8 minutes. I've written down what I want to say, and I've already crossed out most of it, because you don't say those things over a radio. What you say is, "Are you there? Where are you? Are you safe? Are Paige and her grandmother with you? What do you need? What can I bring?" That's what you say. The rest is for when I'm standing in front of you. Recording. Day 15, 2:30 p.m. I need to... Give me a minute. Okay. The 2 p.m. contact with Millard came through. The operator, her name is Maya, she's 16 and she's remarkable, got a clean signal on the second try. The Millard Group's radio is run by a man named Harold who does the coordination, and he has a list. I asked him to check the list for my wife's name, Amy Callahan, or her maiden name if she was using it, Amy Weston. He went quiet for a second. I heard him talking to someone in the background, papers shuffling. He came back on and said, "I don't see an Amy Callahan," and my heart dropped to somewhere around my shoes. Then he said, "But there's an Amy Weston, and a Paige." I didn't say anything for a second. Maya looked at me. I said, "Is she there? Can she come to the radio?" Harold said, "Hold on." I held on. And then, your voice, Amy, not the voicemail voice. Your actual voice, which is not professional and is slightly croaky in the morning and goes up at the end of sentences when you're unsure of something. And that's exactly what it did. Went up at the end of one word, just my name. the way you say it when you're surprised, and I sat down on the chair that Maya had pulled out for me, even though I hadn't noticed she'd done that. I said, "Hi." You said, "Hi." And then neither of us said anything for a second. Recording, day 15, 3:00 p.m. I'll tell you what else you said. You said your mom was there with you, that she was fine, that Paige had been scared, and then had decided to stop being scared, and was now helping the people who organized the food distribution at the Millard Community Center, which is exactly what she would do, which is the most Paige thing I've heard in 2 weeks. You said the house was being used as part of a network of houses, and you'd moved to the community center with your mom and Paige when the organized group started coming together. You said, "I've been trying to call you since the first night." I said, "I know." I was in the truck. You said, "I figured." You said, "Are you okay?" I said, yeah, and I stopped, because okay wasn't the word, and it was also the only word that made sense to say. "I'm okay." You said, "You sound different." I said, 2 weeks in a truck will do that. You laughed. You laughed, Amy, and I had to put my hand over the mic for a second, because I didn't want you to hear whatever was happening with my face. We had 5 minutes on the contact window. Harold had said he could extend it to 10, but Maya made a signal that the frequency was getting traffic, and we should keep it short. So we kept it short. I said, "I'm in Fremont. I'm going to find a route to you." You said, "Don't rush." I said, "I'm going to rush." You said, "I know, but be safe. Paige needs you to be safe, not fast." I said, "Paige is going to be fine either way. You know that." You said, "Yeah," and there was something in the way you said it. "Yeah, she really is." The contact closed. Static. I sat in that chair for a few more minutes. Maya let me. Recording, day 15, evening. Tonight I'm doing something I haven't done since night 0. I'm sitting still and not planning for at least 2 hours. I'm in a room at the Fremont Community Building. A cot, a blanket, actual walls and a ceiling, and the specific luxury of a door I can close. I have coffee. Someone gave me a bowl of actual stew, real cooked stew with vegetables and broth and everything. I have been thinking about it since I ate it. I need to tell you what the plan is. Not because you're listening right now. The contact window is closed until tomorrow morning, but because saying it out loud makes it real. From Fremont to Millard is about 35 miles. North Omaha metro suburbs, approaching from the north on Highway 275, which I know from delivery runs. The challenge is the Omaha metro itself. Bigger city, more density, more unknowns. Stewart has been in contact with the Millard group longer than the Lincoln network has, so he has better route information. He says there are 2 corridors that the Fremont perimeter teams have used for supply runs going south. Not all the way to Millard yet, but far enough to establish the route. I'm going to take the truck, just my truck. I'm going to leave Dennis and Pat with the Fremont network. They're needed here. Kyle wants to come. I said yes. Tomorrow morning I talk to you again at the 2 p.m. contact. I'm going to tell you I'm coming, and what route and where to expect me. And then, day after tomorrow? Maybe, depending on what the route looks like. Soon. Recording. Day 16, morning. I've been awake since 4. Not from noise, not from fear, just from being awake. The way you get when something is happening, and your body won't let you sleep through it. I did something at 5 a.m. that I haven't done since this started. I walked outside by myself. Stewart's perimeter people were doing their rounds. I nodded to one of them, and I stood in the street and looked at the sky. It's going to snow today or tomorrow. I could smell it last night, and the sky this morning has that specific flat white that means it's close. First snow of the season. I stood in the street and listened. The city around me, Fremont at dawn, made a very specific sound. Not silence, because silence would have been scarier. More like breath, held breath. The sound of 900 people still asleep or quiet, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet, the distant edge of something that wasn't those 900 people, something that moved through the edges of the city, the way water finds level, the low background of whatever this has become. But over that, birds. I don't know birds. I couldn't tell you what kind, but two of them, calling back and forth in a tree somewhere on the south side of the street. The specific, unconcerned conversation of birds who don't process the world the same way I do. The birds in that particular tree didn't care. They had their own morning. I went back inside and got more coffee. Recording. Day 16, noon. Route planning done with Stewart and his team. The best corridor from Fremont to Millard runs on Highway 36 east to somewhere called Valley, then south on a state road that parallels the Platte River to where it meets West Dodge Road. And from there, West Dodge Road runs straight into the Millard area. That last section is suburban commercial, the kind of road with big box stores and gas stations and the density that goes with it, and it's going to be the hardest part. But Stewart's team has done it twice on a vehicle smaller than mine and says it's passable with care. 36 miles. In good conditions, 40 minutes. In these conditions, 2-3 hours, maybe more. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Kyle and I, one truck. I talked to Harold at the 2 p.m. contact, and he passed the message to you. I don't know what you said back, because Maya was relaying and she summarized it as, okay, she understands. She said, be careful. There's something else she wants to tell you in person. Something else she wants to tell you in person. I have been thinking about that specific fragment for the last 2 hours. There's no way to interpret it that isn't good. I'm choosing to interpret it as good. Recording. Day 16, evening. Kyle knocked on the room door at about 7 and stuck his head in and said, we good to go tomorrow? I said yes. He said, I was thinking, after we get there, after you find your family, is there a plan? I said, the plan is, I find my family. He said, and after? I thought about it. The Millard network, they're going to need what the Lincoln network needs. Trucks, drivers, route knowledge, supply runs. The same work, just pointed in a different direction. He nodded. He was quiet for a second. Then, I don't have anywhere to go. I mean, I had a roommate in Omaha, but I haven't been able to reach him. I don't know. So I'm just going to keep going where this is going, I think. I said, you're good at this, Kyle. He said, at what specifically? I said, staying calm when things are bad, being useful before you're asked. Those two things. He looked at the floor. He said, my dad was a firefighter. I said, figured it was something like that. He went to bed after that. I heard him in the room next door on his cot. Recording. Day 17, 7 a.m. This is probably the last recording I make from outside. The day I drive to Millard. I want to say something before we go. 22 years of long-haul driving. That's a lot of roads. A lot of nights in the bunk. A lot of early mornings in truck stop parking lots. A lot of hours just me, and the sound of the engine, and the mile markers going past. Most of what I know, I learned in this truck. How to read weather on a flat horizon. How to judge road surface from pavement color. How to pick a rest spot that feels safe at 2 in the morning. How to manage 14 hours of focus. None of that prepared me for the last 17 days, and all of it did. I'm going to get in the truck. I'm going to drive to Millard. I'm going to find Amy and Paige, and Amy's mother, and I'm going to sit in whatever room they're in, and I'm not going to move for a long time. And then, and I know this about myself now in a way I didn't before, I'm going to get back in the truck. Because the roads between places like Fremont and Lincoln and Millard, those roads need to work. They need drivers who know how to move through the bad parts without panicking. They need fuel chains and supply routes, and people who understand the specific geometry of getting 60,000 pounds of necessary things from one place to another without dying. That's what I can do. I just need to go home first. Kyle is already in the cab. I can hear the engine running from here. Let's go. Recording. Day 17, 3:45 p.m. I'm going to finish this story properly because you deserve the full thing, not just pieces. We left Fremont at 7:30. Highway 36 East was clear for the first 14 miles, then increasingly cluttered in the approaches to Valley. I went around Valley on a farm road. That section was slow. Mud from recent rain frozen at the edges, but the road was solid enough for the truck. Rejoined the route south of town. The stretch paralleling the Platte was quiet. Long stretches of flat road with the river somewhere to our right. Bare trees, the occasional farmhouse. Kyle was on the CB, and the binoculars alternately. We talked, but not a lot. Both of us watching the road. West Dodge Road. I'd driven West Dodge Road before, delivering to a warehouse off the commercial strip. I knew the exits, the way the big box stores lined up, the McDonald's and the Walgreens and the Costco parking lot. All of that was there, unchanged in structure, drastically changed in character, mostly empty, mostly quiet. One section near a gas station had a cluster of infected, 11, Kyle counted, and I went around on the parallel road, which added 10 minutes. We saw 3 other living people on West Dodge Road. A couple walking with a shopping cart loaded with bags, moving fast along the sidewalk, who looked at the truck with the immediate alert of prey animals, but didn't run. And a man on a bicycle, moving east, who we passed going the other direction, and who held up one hand as we went by. 3 people. Kyle said, "It's not over. It's just different." I said, "Yeah." The Millard Community Center was on a residential street off 168th and Harrison. I'd been given the address by Stewart and cross-checked it on the atlas. I turned off West Dodge onto Harrison and went south and found the street and turned on it and drove slowly. There was a barricade at the end of the block, a good one. Cars pushed bumper to bumper across the road, some gaps visible for pedestrian access, a couple of people at the gaps. When they saw the truck, one of them ran inside. I stopped the Kenworth about 30 feet from the barricade. Kyle said, "Brett." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go." I got out of the cab. The woman who came out of the gap in the barricade first was someone I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, wearing a heavy jacket, a radio clipped to her belt. She looked at me. Then she looked behind her and made a gesture. And then, Paige. She was running before she was fully through the gap, and she had that specific way she runs, slightly knock-kneed, arms pumping more than necessary, and she hit me at full speed, which is not that many pounds, but still rocked me back half a step. And she was talking before her face was in my jacket, rapid fire, something about the community center and the dog they'd found, and how she'd learned to play cards, and something about Grandma's knees hurting, and I had both arms around her and I was not saying anything, just, "Yeah." You came through the gap 30 seconds later. You had your hair pulled back and one of your work sweaters with the paint stain on the left sleeve that you could never quite get out. You stopped for a second and looked at me. I don't know what my face looked like. Whatever it looked like, you put your hand on the side of it. You said, "Hi, Brett." I said, "Hi." And Paige said, from somewhere in my jacket, "Dad, can we go home now?" And I said, "Pretty soon, Paige, pretty soon." Recording, day 30, morning. I know I said day 17 was the last recording. I lied. Or, not lied, I just wasn't done. Day 30. 1 month, almost to the hour, since that emergency broadcast came on in the middle of the night on I-70, 40 miles outside Wichita. I'm in the truck again. Of course I am. The Kenworth is parked outside the Millard Community Center, and I've been doing supply runs between here and Fremont for the past 12 days, learning the routes, connecting the networks. Dennis came down from Lincoln for a week to help establish the Lincoln-Fremont-Millard triangle, and now there are 4 trucks running that corridor on a rotating schedule. I'm not the only driver anymore, not even close, but I'm one of the ones who knows these roads. Amy is here. Paige is here. Amy's mom's knees actually do hurt. She's been saying so for 3 years, and the community clinic has been giving her anti-inflammatories from the supply run. Lori helped coordinate from the University Medical Center. Yes, Lori, who is now running clinical supply coordination between 3 networks, 3 locations, 60 miles of road. The networks talk to each other. They help each other. They're not one thing. They're separate, with different characters and different leaders and different strengths. But they talk. Stewart in Fremont, Dr. Mercer in Lincoln, Harold, and the woman who's actually running things in Millard. whose name is Renata, a 48-year-old ER nurse, who took one look at the crisis and built the structure around it like she'd been waiting for the right scale of problem. It's not fixed. I want to be clear about that. It's not fixed. It's not even close to fixed. It's the earliest possible version of something that might eventually become fixed. And there are thousands of people in this region who didn't make it to any of these networks. And nobody talks about that enough. And I'm not going to talk about it enough in this recording either, because I don't have the right words. I just know it's there. But last night after dinner, actual dinner, cooked food, Paige ate an entire bowl of pasta and complained that it needed more salt, which is an extremely Paige complaint. After dinner, I sat outside on the steps of the community center, and it was cold, real cold, the first real winter cold of the season, and the sky was clear, and I could see more stars than I normally can because there are no lights anymore, except the generators inside, and they don't reach the sky. I sat there for a while. Kyle came and sat next to me. He'd moved his operation to Millard once his roommate turned out to be, once he established his roommate wasn't at the community center. He didn't talk about it, Kyle. He just redirected. He sat next to me on the steps, and we both looked at the sky. After a while, he said, "You ever going to stop driving?" I said, "Eventually." He said, "What does eventually look like?" I thought about it. Somewhere out there on the edge of what I could hear, far off, past the neighborhood's perimeter, past the cars and the fences, and the specific quiet of a city that had closed in on itself, there was movement. That particular not quite sound of things that still moved through the dark, following noise, following whatever they followed. Still there, still present, not gone. I said, "Eventually looks like the roads being safe enough that someone else can drive them. Until then, I drive." He said, "That could be a long time." I said, "I know." He said, "Okay." We sat there a little longer. Then it got too cold and we went inside. Recording. Day 30, afternoon. I want to end this with something specific. Not a lesson, not a summary. Just something specific. The Atlas. I've had the Rand McNally in this truck for, it's got to be 6 years at least. The binding is cracked. A coffee stain on the Nebraska section that predates all of this by at least 2 years. I've used it on every run that took me off the main freight corridors, which is more runs than people think. I used it every day of the last month. Some days I barely put it down. Page 47, Nebraska. I can find mile markers on that map by feel. I know where I've been by the finger smudges. Paige found it this morning. I'd left it in the cab and she climbed up and got it, which she's been doing, climbing into the cab, because Paige has decided the truck is now her favorite thing in the world, which is both gratifying and slightly inconvenient when I'm trying to work. She had it open to the Nebraska page, and she was tracing roads with her finger. I asked her what she was doing. She said, "Looking for where you went." I said, "Which direction do you want?" She handed me the atlas. I traced the route. Every road I could remember. From Wichita, north, to Concordia, north to Phillipsburg, West Junction, northeast toward Concordia, and then north, the county road maze through Nebraska, Hastings, the depot, Lincoln, Fremont, and then west-south to here. It looked like nothing on the page, random lines through empty space. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "You drove a lot." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Were you scared?" I said, "Yeah, some of the time." She thought about that. She has the specific seriousness that 8-year-olds have when they're working something out. She said, "It's okay to be scared and still drive." I don't know where she got that. I don't think she got it from me. I think she worked it out herself, the way she works out most things, independently, in a way that's slightly more direct than the way adults arrive at the same truth. I said, yeah, that's exactly right." She handed me back the atlas and climbed down from the cab. I sat there with it in my hands for a minute. The Nebraska page, all those roads. The truck engine is running. It's always running. There's a run north to Fremont scheduled for 4 p.m., and I've got a pickup list from Renata and a set of coordinates from Stuart, and about 150 miles of familiar road between here and there and back. I know those roads.